Shen Zhi Han had once been the crown prince. On the day he was stripped of that title, his legs were beaten until he could no longer stand. Yet the marriage arranged between him and my legitimate elder sister still had to proceed. The palace intended to send a bride perfunctorily to his separate residence and call the matter settled. My elder sister refused no matter what, so the marriage fell upon me. Now Shen Zhi Han was a discarded man. On the day of our wedding, there was no bridal sedan, no drums, and no music. The palace merely sent a donkey cart covered in blue cloth to collect me from the side gate of the Marquis's manor. The cart headed west, farther and farther into desolation. The driver was an unfamiliar old eunuch. When we arrived, he set down both me and the old wooden chest that served as my dowry, then immediately turned the cart around and left, without once looking back. I stood before the weathered wooden gate and looked up at the place called a separate residence. In truth, it was only a small house that had been deserted for years. More than half the plaster on its courtyard walls had fallen away, and the bronze door ring was rusted black. I drew a breath and pushed the gate open. The courtyard was at least reasonably tidy. The main house had 3 rooms, its door only half closed, with a faint light glimmering inside. Lifting my skirt, I stepped in. An oil lamp burned in the room, casting a dim yellow light. On a bed platform beside the window, a young man reclined half upright. He wore a faded blue robe, with a thin quilt spread over his knees. He was gaunt, with prominent brow bones and a straight nose, but his lips held no trace of color. He had the pallor of someone who had not seen sunlight for a long time. At the sound of my footsteps, he turned his head. His eyes paused on my face for a moment before withdrawing again. He went back to looking at the old locust tree outside the window, half withered and half alive, as though nothing in the world had anything to do with him. Behind me, the wind pushed the door shut with a creak. I set my bundle on the table, took a round stool across from him and spoke solemnly. "My name is Cui Xiuan. She is in passing time, on as in a paper kite? You must have met my legitimate elder sister before, haven't you? She refused to marry you no matter what. So my father sent me here in her place. I was blunt because I wanted to find out whether he had feelings for my elder sister. If he did, I would simply concentrate on living my own life well." He did not turn around. He did not seem to care much either, I continued. "From now on, the 2 of us should live well together. Nothing matters more than that." At last he looked away from the window and turned toward me. His gaze was detached and cold. "Live together?" He gave a faint mocking laugh. "How do you intend to live with a cripple like me?" My gaze dropped to his legs. The thin quilt covered them completely, so I could not see anything unusual. Yet his lower body had not moved at all since I arrived. My father had said that he had suffered torture in prison. His knees had been injured, and after he was released, he could no longer stand. No one had explained exactly how severe his injuries were. Still, he could sit propped against the bed platform, and his waist could support his body. At the very least, he was not completely paralyzed. There was still hope. "You eat when it is time to eat, take medicine when it is time to take medicine, sit in the sun when it is sunny, and close the windows when it rains. Isn't that what life is?" I stood, went to his bedside, crouched down, and looked directly into his eyes. "Shen Zhi Han, do you want to hear how I lived in the Marquis's manor?" He did not answer, nor did he avoid my gaze. "My mother was a concubine. When I was 7, she died of illness. My father's principal wife disliked the sight of me, and sent me to live beside the woodshed in the back courtyard. In winter, wind blew in from every side. In summer, rain leaked everywhere. My elder sister wore silk while I wore coarse cloth. My elder brother went to school while I chopped firewood. One winter, I had a fever for 3 straight days, and no one even brought me a bowl of hot water. At the time, I begged heaven to let me survive. I promised that, as long as I lived, I would live well. I spoke calmly, as if I were telling someone else's story. So you see, I smiled when I was married here. I have a home to live in, food to eat, and no one to sneer and jeer in my ear anymore. To me, these are already the best days I could have. I do not despise the circumstances you are in. Do not look down on me because of my birth. Others have cast us aside, so let us not cast our elves aside too. All right? The room was silent for a long time. The oil lamp flickered, scattering shifting patches of light and shadow across his face. "Do you know what marrying me means? It means I no longer have to watch my principal mother's expressions. No longer have to be bullied by my elder sister, and no longer have to be treated by my father like an object and married off at random as someone's concubine." As I spoke, I counted each point on my fingers. "That sounds very good." The corner of his mouth moved, almost imperceptibly. "You have truly thought it through." I shook my head. "No, I have not thought it through. I simply had no other choice." In that case, it is better to struggle on than to die. He was quiet for a while, then slowly turned back toward the window. The branches and leaves of the locust tree stirred softly in the night wind. Moonlight filtered through the canopy and scattered in fragments across the ground. What did you say your name was? Cui Yuan. Cui Yuan. He repeated it once, his voice hoarse. Yuan, as in a paper kite? Yes, my mother chose it. She said people are like paper kites. We may seem to be held fast by a string and unable to decide our own fate, but when the wind is strong enough, we can still struggle free and fly into the sky. He was silent for a long time. It is a beautiful name. I went to the table and opened my bundle. Inside were the few things I had brought from the Marquis's manor. 2 changes of clothes, a small pouch of loose silver, a packet of osmanthus cakes, and an old medical text with worn edges. Before leaving the manor, I had secretly gone into the kitchen and made the osmanthus cakes. Wrapped in several layers of oil paper, they still carried a faint, gentle fragrance. I took 2 cakes, returned to the bed platform, and held them out to him. Are you hungry? I made these. They do not look very pretty, but they taste all right. He lowered his eyes to the 2 cakes but did not take them. You do not have to treat me this way. I frowned slightly. This man was far too particular. I pressed the cakes into his hand. We are husband and wife now. You had better pull yourself together quickly. I do not want a sickly husband all day long. When you can stand again, it will be your turn to wait on me. My face grew a little warm after I said that. What kind of husband and wife are we? We have not even bowed before heaven and earth. A crane fallen from the clouds into the mud had become the companion of a paper kite like me. His fingers curled lightly around the 2 cakes, and the oil paper rustled softly. Stand again? He repeated those 3 words as though speaking of an impossible dream. I pretended not to hear the self-mockery in his voice and turned to leave. I will see whether there is any rice left in the kitchen. Eat the cakes first. They will lose their fragrance if you leave them too long. The moment I stepped out of the main room, the night wind swept into my face, making me shiver. I clenched my fists and hurried toward the kitchen. The kitchen was small. A layer of dust covered the stove, several bundles of dry firewood were stacked in the corner, and more than half a jar of rice remained in the grain urn. Beside it were several wilted cabbages and a small piece of smoked meat. Things were not too bad after all. I lit the fire, rinsed the rice, and set it in the pot. I sliced the smoked meat thinly and cooked it with the rice. The flames rose in the stove, making the whole kitchen feel warm. Crouching in front of the fire, I took the old medical text from my sleeve. My mother had left this book to me. She had originally been a village physician. Years ago, while my father was traveling, she had saved him. Only after she followed him home did she discover that he already had a principal wife. By then, however, she was carrying me and could no longer simply leave. She went from being his secondary wife to being a concubine, and from then on was confined within the inner household, never practicing medicine again. Even my indifferent father had likely forgotten that his secondary wife had once been highly skilled in healing. The book recorded remedies and methods of care for injuries to the sinews and bones. Its pages had yellowed and turned brittle, and all 4 corners were worn from being turned so often. When I had crouched beside his bed earlier, I had not dared to study his legs too closely. People in the palace said he had suffered torture in prison and sustained grave injuries to his knees. But if only his sinews and bones were injured, and the damage had not reached the root of the problem, recovery might still be possible with careful treatment. Of course, this had to be done step by step. There might be spies around this house. The palace had cast him here, but no one could guarantee that they had truly set their minds at ease. His crippled legs were both a blade in his heart and a talisman that kept him alive. After all, a cripple could never ascend to the throne. We had to move slowly in everything. I put the medical text away and stirred the porridge. The fragrance of rice mingled with the salty scent of smoked meat as the pot burbled steadily. When I carried 2 bowls of porridge back to the main room, I saw that only 1 osmanthus cake remained in his hand. He had truly eaten one. I was delighted, though I did not show it. I set the bowls on the table, then carried a small table in from the kitchen and placed it beside his bed platform. The smoked meat porridge is ready, and it is still hot. Eat quickly. He looked at the bowl, then at me. The heat from the stove had flushed my face. A few damp strands of hair clung to my cheeks, and my cuff bore a smudge of soot. I knew I could not look very neat at that moment. He watched me for a while without speaking or touching his chopsticks. I sat on the other side of the little table, lifted my own bowl, blew on it to cool it, and took a generous mouthful. The seasoning is just right, and the smoked meat has not spoiled. He picked up his bowl as well. His movements were graceful and refined. He was so beautiful that merely looking at him seemed filling enough. The wind rose outside. The branches of the locust tree rustled, and the oil lamp flame swayed several times. I stood to close the window. As I reached it, I glanced outside by accident. Deep in the locust grove beyond the courtyard, several dark figures seemed to flash past. Without changing my expression, I closed the window and returned to my porridge. "Is something wrong?" he asked. "The wind has risen. I was afraid your porridge would grow cold." I smiled and lowered my head to take another large mouthful, but my heart felt heavy. There truly were people watching this house in secret, but it did not matter. He and I were two abandoned chess pieces. We could take things slowly. I scrubbed the large iron pot clean of its dust and boiled a full pot of hot water. When I prepared to help him wash himself, I felt a little embarrassed, while he looked somewhat flustered. I forced myself to appear calm, but he clutched the quilt tightly. "What are you going to do?" His face darkened, as though I were a lustful woman trying to take advantage of him. "Of course I am going to wash and change my husband's clothes." I spoke with complete righteousness. "Have you no shame?" he ground out. "Do you know that you smell?" I asked. As I said it, I waved a hand in front of my face. He was injured, and I did not know how long it had been since he had changed his clothes. A faint smell of medicine mingled with old sweat clung to him. Propped on the bed platform under the lamp, he looked briefly flustered for the first time in eyes that were usually so calm. "You do not need to, I can do it myself." He turned his face away. "How will you do it yourself?" I asked in return. He said nothing more. The line of his jaw tightened, and the angle of his cheekbones looked even more hollow under the lamplight. Without waiting for another refusal, I took the only clean cloth from my bundle and set it on the edge of the basin. "What is the big deal? I am only washing you." Yet when I stood beside his bed and reached out to loosen the ties of his robe, my hand trembled slightly. His body also went visibly rigid. The room was so quiet that only the occasional soft crackle from the oil lamp could be heard. I untied the fastenings. His outer robe parted to reveal his inner garment. My face burned, but I bit the inside of my lower lip and did my best to remain calm, continuing with an ease that was almost numb. Only when I pulled his inner garment down to his shoulders did I see his entire upper body. I swallowed softly and had to work hard to suppress the urge to touch him. As I wiped him down with the cloth, I remembered what others had once said. Shen Zhi Han had been the prince most skilled in riding and archery. At 16 he had marched north with the army, and personally shot and killed an enemy general. A man like that was now trapped inside a body that could not rise, finding even movement difficult. What a pity. Hot water ran down from his collarbone, leaving a thin trail. I followed that trail downward with the cloth, and his chest rose and fell sharply. At that moment I should have stopped to let him regain his composure. But I had always been the sort of person who refused to yield before a strong opponent. The more flustered someone became, the more stubborn I grew. Outwardly, I remained utterly composed. I even hummed a few tuneless lines under my breath. "Can't you?" At last he could bear it no longer. "Stop singing." "Oh!" I immediately fell silent. After washing his back, I moved to his front. The cloth slid to his waist and abdomen. I saw his lower stomach tighten slightly with tension. When my hand, separated by the warm cloth, pressed there, a muscle at his side gave a sharp twitch. "Do not move," I said. At last he could not endure it any longer. "Enough." He seized my wrist. This time, he used no small amount of force. His grip made the bones in my wrist ache sharply. I frowned in pain and looked up, only to meet a face flushed with both embarrassment and extreme anger. His normally tranquil eyes churned with countless emotions. The lamplight trembled across his face, thick brows, deep-set eyes, a high straight nose, and thin lips pressed together in anger. Instead, it made him seem far more alive. "I told you I did not need this," he said through gritted teeth. "Do you not understand?" "Shen Zhi Han," I called softly. "Your face is red." His pupils abruptly constricted. As if someone had stepped on his tail, he released me at once and turned his face away. His jaw was taut like a fully drawn bow, and his profile beneath the lamp was cold and hard. I lowered my head and wrung out the cloth again. In truth, my own heart was pounding like a war drum, but I refused to show weakness. I dipped the cloth in the basin one more time. "I am not done washing you yet. What is the rush?" He turned back to glare at me. His eyes held embarrassment and anger at having been offended, but he was completely helpless against me. His glare made me feel a little guilty, but it also reassured me. The fact that he could still get angry meant that he still had life in him. "I have not washed your legs yet," I said. He immediately turned his head away. His expression changed in an instant. The embarrassment and fluster from before vanished, replaced by profound wariness and a resistance that seemed born of shame. It was like a snail drawing its head back into its shell. I set the cloth on the edge of the basin, walked to the foot of the bed platform, and bent to lift the thin quilt. He immediately gripped one corner of it tightly. "I told you there is no need." His voice was not loud, but it was as cold as a blade. I looked at his hand. His knuckles were distinct blue veins faintly visible as he pressed down on the quilt, as though guarding forbidden ground and refusing to let anyone enter it. I crouched down until our eyes were level. "Shen Zhi Han." I said his name very softly. "We are husband and wife. No matter how badly your legs are hurt, you must let me see them. How can I care for you if I do not?" He said nothing. His lips tightened into a line. "How about this?" After thinking for a moment, I said, "You do it yourself. I will not look." He remained silent for a long time. Just when I thought he would keep silent forever, his hand slowly loosened. He braced himself against the edge of the bed platform, painstakingly shifted back little by little, then bent down and rolled up his trouser leg himself. Every movement was slow and extremely difficult. Each time he managed to roll it up a little farther, he had to pause and rest. Beads of sweat appeared on his brow. I did not help him. I simply stood quietly beside him. At that moment his pride was more important than anything else. When the trouser leg had been rolled to his knee, I finally saw it completely. His kneecap was not visibly deformed, nor were there any hideous scars left from healed external wounds. At a glance, nothing even seemed wrong. Only the muscles around his knee were a little thinner than his upper thigh, and the flesh was slightly slack, carrying the pallor of someone who had not moved for a long time. It seemed the problem was not in his bones. I crouched down and tried to recall the notes on tendon injuries in my old medical book. If a bone were broken, the knee would certainly be deformed, swollen, perhaps even with bony protrusions. But the shape of his knee was almost completely normal. This proved that the injury was not in the bone. If it was not the bone, then it was the tendons. Several important tendons around the knee connect the thigh muscles to the calf and control bending and straightening. If they had been forcibly stretched or torn under torture, or damaged so that they lost their elasticity, then even with the bones intact, a person would be unable to stand. There was a particular form of torture in the Ministry of Justice's Great Prison, used especially for interrogations. They tied ropes tightly around the backs of the knees, causing pain so great that the victim would feel worse than death. "Were your knees ever bound with ropes?" He looked up at me, surprise flashing through his eyes. "If the tendons are injured, they are easier to treat than broken bones. With proper care, there may still be hope." The hand holding his bowl stopped in midair. He lifted his eyes directly to mine, and complex emotions surged within them. "You do not need to say such things to comfort me. Why would I comfort you?" I looked at him. "I am a very practical person. Healing you would be for my own sake as well. Must I chop firewood, tend the stove, and support you every day for the rest of my life?" He looked at me quietly without saying a word. I smiled at him, picked up the basin and went outside, muttering, "The water has gone cold. I need to boil another pot." Only when I stepped out did the night wind hit my face and make me realize that I was unbearably warm. I stood beneath the corridor, looked up at the crescent moon, pressed the cool back of my hand against my cheeks, and took a deep breath. Only then did my wildly racing heart settle back to normal. On the customary third day return to a bride's family after marriage, I woke before dawn. Lying on the hard wooden bed in the east room, I stared at the beam overhead for a long time, wondering whether I should go home or not. There was nothing in the Marcus's manner that I cared to remember, except my mother's spirit tablet. Yet that tablet was like a thin thread that held me fast wherever I went. If I did not return, there would be no one left to burn incense for her. I sat up, changed clothes, went into the kitchen to make a pot of porridge, and set it beside Shen Zhi Han's bed. He was still asleep, lying on his side with his face turned inward and the thin quilt pulled to his shoulders, leaving only the back of his black-haired head exposed. I stood in the doorway for a moment before turning and leaving. The donkey cart jolted along for nearly 2 double hours before it reached the Marquis Manor. The old gatekeeper nearly had his eyes pop out when he saw me. Stammering, he called me "Third Miss," then hurried inside to report my arrival. I did not wait for him. I entered through the side gate. The corridors were painted a deep vermilion, and the paths were paved with blue stone. Peonies bloomed luxuriantly in the garden. Yet none of the wealth that filled this manor had ever belonged to me, not even in the smallest part. I went around to the small Buddhist shrine in the back courtyard. My mother's spirit tablet sat quietly in the most hidden corner of the altar. I knelt, lit the incense I had brought with me, placed it in the burner, and then set down a plate of osmanthus cakes. "Mother," I said softly, "I am married. I married a former crown prince whose legs are crippled. If you could hear this, you would surely be heartbroken. But I think it is not so bad. He is very handsome, and his temperament is reasonably agreeable." Incense smoke rose slowly, curling in circles through the shaft of light. "Mother, do not worry. Your daughter can handle it." I raised a hand and wiped the dust from the spirit tablet. "This time, I will take all of your medical books with me when I leave. I was only 7 when my mother died. I remembered her coughing up blood through an entire winter. My principal mother thought it inauspicious and would not allow a physician to be summoned. At the time, my father was away on official business. By the time he returned, my mother had long since been buried. As soon as I stepped out of the small Buddhist shrine, I ran into my legitimate elder sister beneath the covered corridor. She wore a new pomegranate red skirt, and a dangling gold hairpin was set in her hair, making her look even more beautiful and noble. The moment she saw me, she froze in surprise. Then the corners of her mouth curved into a biting smile. "Oh my, isn't this the crown princess of our family?" "Ah no, my memory is so poor. The crown prince's legs are crippled. I suppose I should call you the former crown princess instead." After saying that, she and the maids beside her burst into laughter. I could not be bothered to deal with her. I merely said coolly, "Elder sister," and tried to go around her. She stepped sideways to block my way, looked me over from head to toe, and smiled more deeply. "Do you not know yet?" She turned the jade bracelet on her wrist, her tone light. "Father has already arranged my marriage. I am to marry the concubine-born son of the Marquis of Yongyi. He is from a proper noble line, is neither missing an arm nor a leg, and has a brilliant future ahead of him." Was not the Marquis of Yongyi the Empress's natal family and the Crown Prince's maternal relatives? The Cui family had found someone else to marry in her place, yet they were not angry. On the contrary, they were continuing an alliance by marriage with the Cui family. It seemed that even the people related to Shen Zhi Han by blood had abandoned him. "Then congratulations, elder sister," I said calmly. "You are not angry?" She tilted her head at me. "Then again, it makes sense. Since you were little, you have always been like a block of wood, exactly like your mother. I heard that when she saved father years ago, she dreamed of soaring to the top and becoming a phoenix. Yet when she died, she was still only a concubine." My fingers tightened within my sleeves. "You are right, elder sister," I smiled. My mother truly did not understand the rules of this manor. She only knew how to save lives. She did not know that, when a man is in trouble, she ought to name her price first. The smile on my elder sister's face froze for an instant, but she quickly recovered. With a disdainful snort, she swept away with her maids. Just as I was about to leave the inner residence, my father's personal servant stopped me. "Third miss, master asks you to come to the study." That was truly beyond my expectations. My father stood before the bookshelves, holding a memorial. Hearing my footsteps, he turned around. He had aged, silver threaded both temples, and many more lines had appeared at the corners of his eyes. Yet he still retained the elegant, slender bearing of a scholar, every gesture carrying the air of a learned man. A man like that, handsome and graceful as he rode and wandered on his travels, could indeed easily make a simple village physician fall in love with him. "Yuan," he called. His tone was gentle, but his eyes were sharp with scrutiny. "How is the crown prince?" I lowered my eyes, my heart tightening at once. "Reporting to father, His Highness's knees are injured. He has difficulty moving about and needs someone to care for him in his daily life." "Oh." He pondered for a moment. "How badly is he injured? Can he still stand?" "Your daughter does not know." Father walked to the window and tapped the frame lightly with one finger, beat by beat. "The palace's attitude toward this matter is very ambiguous. They have not ordered him confined, nor have they assigned guards to watch him. They merely threw him into the western outskirts and left him there. But that does not mean that others are not keeping an eye on him. The struggle among the princes is becoming fiercer by the day. The first prince has been making moves constantly of late, and the third prince is no less active. If the crown prince..." He paused and corrected himself. "If Shen Zhi Han makes any move, you know what you must do you not?" He stared at me, his gaze bright and piercing. I frowned faintly. "Please explain, father." "Your elder sister has been promised to the concubine-born son of the Marquis of Yongyi. The Empress wishes to support another son. The Cui family, therefore, has naturally boarded the same boat as the Marquis of Yongyi's household and the third prince. If one prospers, all prosper. If one fails, all fail. Yuan, if the former crown prince rises again one day, you are a daughter of the Cui family who was married to him in another's place. Naturally, you will find it hard to escape his reckoning. Therefore, watch him. When the time is right, get rid of him. I looked straight into father's eyes, hearing every word as clearly as could be. So I was not an abandoned chess piece. I was a chess piece meant to be used. Father, I said quietly, do you still remember my mother? The expression on his face stiffened for an instant, but he quickly regained his composure. Yuan, your father truly had his difficulties back then. You know that. I interrupted him, my voice meek as a lamb's. While she was alive, mother often told me not to blame father. She said that he had his own difficulties. At last a crack appeared in father's expression. He fell silent, the hand at his side tightening slightly. Your mother, he finally said, his voice much lower than before, was a good woman. A good woman? I rolled those 3 words around in my heart, slowly tasting them. The end of a good woman was a handful of yellow earth and a spirit tablet stuffed into a hidden corner of the Buddhist shrine, not even given a stick of incense on holidays. Father smiled faintly. You should return. He did not keep me. He only told the steward to give me a pouch of silver. The donkey cart rattled along the road home. The setting sun turned the clouds in the west a blazing orange-red. When I returned to the separate residence in the western outskirts, night had fully fallen, but the main room was still lit. Shen Zhi Han was sitting propped against the bed platform. When he saw me return, his expression was a little strange. What is it? Did you think I had run away? He turned his face away awkwardly. It seemed I had guessed correctly. You cried, he said with certainty. I did not. I turned my face aside and sniffed. The wind outside was just too strong. I am hungry. I am hungry too, Shen Zhi Han said. Look at him. He could now openly demand that I cook for him. I turned toward the kitchen and began working. That night in the East Room I turned over the medical notes my mother had left me and read through the entire night. Only when the rooster crowed for the 3rd time did I close the book. I had formed a plan. For damaged knee tendons, I should use acupuncture to clear the channels together with warm medicinal treatment. I did not have acupuncture needles, and buying them outside would attract too much attention. But I had new sewing needles. After holding them over a candle flame and scalding them in boiling water 3 times, they could barely be used. The medicinal treatment was not difficult. There were still a few common ingredients in the kitchen. I had noticed them long ago, hanging on the wall behind the stove. Dried ginger and Sichuan peppercorns were already there. I only lacked a few herbs. I could pretend to go into the hills to gather mushrooms and bring them back along the way. When I returned to the main room carrying a basin of medicated water and a pouch of needles, Shen Zhi Han was propped against the bed platform with an old book on his knees, one that he did not seem to have read very many times. When he saw what I was holding, his brows moved slightly. What are those? To treat your legs. I set the basin of medicated water beside his feet and crouched down, rolling up my sleeves. I will cure you, Shen Zhi Han, trust me. As I spoke, I reached out and rolled up his trouser legs. This time he did not clutch the quilt tightly and refused to let me touch him. Still, his body instinctively tensed. When I had rolled the cloth to his knees, I brought the steaming basin closer, soaked the cloth, wrung it out, and laid it over both his knees. Steam rose in billows, and the smell of medicine spread through the room. He took a quiet breath, though I did not know whether it was from heat or pain. Is it too hot? I asked. No. He paused. It is only a little numb. My heart leapt with joy. Feeling was a good sign. It proved his channels had not completely withered. They were merely damaged and blocked. I took a sewing needle from the cloth pouch, heated it over the candle flame once more, and leaned close to his knee. He lowered his gaze to the shining needle, and his throat bobbed. If your needle makes me truly lame then we will have all 9 clans executed, I deliberately replied into false, exaggerated crying voice to frighten him. He was silent for a moment, then gave a faint laugh. Then you will have to tend to this crippled husband of yours for the rest of your life, Cui Shi Yuan. His tone was terrible. He had even learned to tease me. But he had said, the rest of your life. If I truly cured his legs, would I end up like my mother? The thought made my heart ache again. Do not talk, you will distract me. I held his knee with one hand and quickly found the point at the outer knee eye. The positions of the points drawn in the book appeared in my mind. I took a deep breath, aimed at the outer knee eye point, and inserted the needle. As the needle went in, his thigh muscle gave a strong twitch, but he did not make a sound. He only tightened his grip on the book in his hand. If it hurts, you can cry out. It does not hurt, he said in a low voice. I twisted another needle into the inner knee eye point, placed 2 more at the Yang Mound spring points, and finally set one at the leg 3 miles point. Once I had finished, I realized that I had held my breath for a long time, and that beads of sweat had formed on my brow. Other than needling myself, this was the first time I had ever given acupuncture to another person. Shen Zhi Han was truly fortunate to have survived it. Naturally, I did not dare let him know that I was still only a beginner. I could only treat a dead horse as though it were alive. Finished. I stood and wiped the sweat from my forehead with my sleeve. Leave the needles in for a quarter of an hour. Do not move around carelessly. He lowered his head to look at the shining needles in his knees. His expression was extraordinarily complicated. Surprise, caution, and expectation all mingled together. Who did you learn this from? I was wiping medicinal water from my hands with the cloth. At his question, my movement paused for a beat. From my mother. I set the cloth down and sat on the round stool beside him. He tilted his head to look at me. She was originally a village physician in Qingzhou. She cured someone's illness, only for that very person to repay kindness with resentment and deceive her into becoming his concubine. Is that not laughable? I gave a self-mocking laugh. If there is a chance in the future, I will certainly thank my mother-in-law properly. His voice was full of implication. What mother-in-law? I opened my eyes wide at him. Shen Zhi Han smiled gently. Once I understood what he meant, my face heated on its own. Why did this man always choose the road no one else took? Do you know what you are saying? I tried to sound fierce. Did you not say that we are husband and wife? Or is Lady Yuan only humoring me? He even looked aggrieved as he said it, and he had called me Lady Yuan. Suddenly, I was not sure of myself. Could something really have gone wrong with the acupuncture? Unable to help myself, I reached out to touch his forehead. He did not even have a fever. Why had he suddenly begun speaking so tenderly? While I was still baffled, Shen Zhi Han caught the hand I was about to withdraw. Lady Yuan, he said, looking at me, cure me. Let the day come when I can care for you. I looked up at him. Leaves shifted softly in the light of dawn. Light filtered through the canopy, leaving his face half bright and half shadowed. My nose suddenly stung, and I quickly lowered my head, pretending to inspect the needles. Fine. Hiding my face in the shade, I deliberately spoke in a careless voice. You have promised. When you can stand, you must take very good care of me. It is a promise, he replied. My hands betrayed me by growing hot. I did not dare look up at him. Instead, I turned to leaf through my mother's book, pretending to search for something. The pages rustled, but not a single word entered my eyes. In my mind, the words Lady Yuan echoed again and again. When Shen Zhi Han could barely stand, I stopped the acupuncture and only applied the medicine each day. That afternoon, I had just helped him walk 5 laps around the room. The setting sun shone through the leaves of the locust tree, casting a warm light across his profile. Beads of sweat covered his brow. I took out a handkerchief and offered it to him. He did not take it. He simply lowered his head and let the hand holding the cloth wipe his face. The movement was natural, as though we had done it countless times. I froze. As if nothing had happened, he turned to look elsewhere, but his reddened ears had already betrayed him. I am going to cook. I shoved the handkerchief into his hand and practically fled toward the kitchen. Before I reached the kitchen door, a roof tile suddenly fell from the top of the wall. The sound was very faint, like a cat accidentally knocking something down. Yet in that instant, gooseflesh rose all over my body. The evening sky at the horizon burned red. I knew that feeling far too well. During the years I grew up in the back courtyard of the Marquis Manor, the old maids had been best at silently appearing behind me and suddenly slapping the back of my head. Over those years my ears had been trained to be sharper than a cat's. I stopped walking. There were breathing sounds beyond the wall, more than one person. I turned around. Shen Zhi Han was bracing himself against the window frame and slowly making his way toward the bed platform. I nearly used all the strength I had to rush at him, taking 3 steps in 2. I grabbed his sleeve with one hand and pulled him hard away from the window. He staggered. His knees could not bear his weight and his body fell toward me. I caught him around the waist and dragged and pushed him toward the door. Lady Yuan, do not. Before he could finish, the whistle of a blade splitting the air came from behind me. Instinctively, I tilted my head aside. A narrow longsword swept past my hairbun and struck the door frame beside us with a hard thud, its blade humming. Shen Zhi Han's face went white at once. I turned back. 3 men in black had broken in through the window. Their faces were covered, their clothes close-fitting, and the longswords in their hands reflected a cold gleam in the dusk. They did not waste a word or pause. The moment their feet touched the ground, they charged straight at us. Their target was clearly Shen Zhi Han. I was terrified. My legs shook, but my body still moved in front of his. I meant to push him outside, bar the door from within, and hold them off for as long as I could. Before I could act, however, a hand caught my shoulder and yanked me fiercely behind him. The force was so strong I nearly lost my balance. When I regained my senses, he had pulled me outside the door. Shen Zhi Han. As he shut the door, he turned and smiled at me. Run. In that instant I suddenly thought of my mother. So this was what it felt like not to be abandoned. Yet we were both fools. Trying to block a cart with our arms would only decide which of us lived a little longer than the other. When a sword descended in the courtyard, I squeezed my eyes shut. The piercing clash of metal rang through the courtyard, the sound of a sword being knocked away. I opened my eyes abruptly. At some point, 4 figures had appeared atop the courtyard wall. Unlike the assassins, each had a dark yellow cord tied at the waist, faintly visible in the dusk. One rushed into the room and stood in front of Shen Zhi Han, his blade firmly catching the attack. The other 3 moved almost at the same time. Their techniques were swift and decisive. They were secret guards from the palace. The 3 assassins were subdued. In the blink of an eye, 2 were forced to their knees. The last reacted quickly. Knowing the situation had turned against him, he bit through a poison pouch, hidden between his teeth, and died on the spot. The secret guards seemed to have expected this. They did not even try to stop him. They merely confirmed coldly that he was dead. The courtyard fell silent again. The birds that had been perched in the locust tree had scattered in fright during the fight. They were still circling and beating their wings overhead, unsure whether they should land again. I hurried forward to support Shen Zhi Han, who was swaying as though about to fall. A secret guard stepped up and dropped to one knee, his voice low and even. "Your Highness has suffered a fright. This subordinate has obeyed orders to protect your Highness completely, and has not neglected the duty for a single moment." Shen Zhi Han turned around, released the hand he had been holding against the doorframe, and slowly straightened. "Whose orders?" "Mine, naturally." Looking toward the voice, I saw a middle-aged man in plain black robes enter the courtyard with his hands behind his back. He was tall and lean, his steps steady. 2 attendants followed him, also wearing dark yellow cords at their waists. At a glance, he looked no different from an ordinary wealthy gentleman. All the secret guards dropped to their knees. It was the Emperor. My knees reacted faster than my mind. By the time I came back to myself, I was already kneeling on the ground, cold sweat soaking my back. With my head lowered, I saw from the corner of my eye that Shen Zhi Han did not kneel. He merely stood there with a hand against the wall, not looking at his father. The Emperor did not seem to mind. He took a few steps through the courtyard. His gaze passed over the 3 restrained assassins and the body lying on the ground, his expression indifferent. "Your younger brother, the one born of the same mother as you, sent the 3 men tonight." Shen Zhi Han's body trembled slightly. "Mother knew about this too?" The Emperor's tone remained just as detached. "She did, but she did not stop it." Kneeling on the ground, I felt cold to the bone. Shen Zhi Han was silent for a long time. The birds that had flown from the locust tree finally returned to its branches. The night wind blew away the last warmth from the stone paving in the courtyard. When he spoke, his voice had grown hoarse. "Father knew from the beginning." The Emperor walked to Shen Zhi Han and looked down at his bowed son. Father and son stood close enough to touch, yet an invisible abyss seemed to lie between them. "Among all your brothers, you are the most capable of governing a country," the Emperor said. "Law, the people's livelihood, waterworks, border defense. You are capable in every respect. But you have one fatal weakness. You are too merciful." Shen Zhi Han's fingers clenched inside his sleeves. "You were indeed framed. Though they forged the evidence cleanly, from beginning to end I knew." The Emperor clasped his hands behind his back. His voice was so measured that it held not a trace of emotion. "Yet I ignored everything. I stood by with folded arms, went with the tide to strip you of the position of crown prince, cast you into this wasteland, and did not bother to ask after you. Do you know why?" Shen Zhi Han did not answer. His jawline was rigid. "Because you do not understand what it means to be decisive, as if chopping through a nail. You believe that benevolence alone can govern a nation. You believe that tolerating your brothers will earn their kind treatment in return. But look at what your mercy has brought you today." He tipped his chin slightly toward the body on the ground. "To sit in that seat, knowing how to govern, is not enough. You must also know how to kill. If you cannot even keep your own life, why should I hand the empire to you?" The night wind blew through the corridor, making the lantern under the eaves swing violently. Flickering light moved over Shen Zhi Han's face, and for an instant his expression became utterly unfamiliar to me, an understanding cold to the bone, carrying almost boundless sorrow. "What if from now on, I truly give up on myself?" he asked. The Emperor looked at him. "I have many sons." He paused, then added in a voice that was almost ruthlessly cold, "If one does not work, I will choose another. What I want you to remember is that within the imperial family, there is no family affection. Parents, brothers, husband and wife, children before power, they are nothing." I knelt on the ground, my fingernails digging deeply into my palms. Was this imperial power? It could permit a wife and son to destroy one another. It could watch with open eyes as the child it had once lifted to the clouds was trampled into the mud by others. It held not half the love of a father, only the tempering and trial that a sovereign imposed upon an heir. Shen Zhi Han was silent for a very, very long time. Then the corner of his mouth curved faintly. This son understands. The emperor narrowed his eyes slightly and examined him for a moment. Just as he was about to leave, his steps paused and his gaze shifted to me. Under that imposing look, I stopped breathing without realizing it. What is your name? Kneeling on the ground, my throat dry, I answered. This commoner is Cui Shi Yuan, the Kuis family's concubine-born daughter, sent here to marry in another's place? Of course he knew everything. Cold sweat immediately soaked my back. If the matter were investigated, I was also guilty of deceiving the sovereign. The emperor did not look at me again. He turned to Shen Zhi Han. The lantern beneath the eaves laid heavy shadows across his face. How do you intend to deal with this woman? Shen Zhi Han braced himself against the wall and slowly raised his eyes. What do you mean, deal with her? You know what I mean. The emperor's gaze locked onto his face. A ruler has no weakness only when no one stands behind him. Only then can he remain watchful at all times. He paused, his tone as indifferent as if discussing dinner. The way you look at her is not the way one looks at an ordinary concubine. Today, you might block a sword for her. Tomorrow you may do even more foolish things for her. The position of crown prince or this woman. I want you to choose one immediately. I had to be chosen again. I lowered my head and looked at the patterns in the blue stone beneath me. A line of ants was carrying its eggs, moving its nest. How hard they struggled to live, only to be crushed under one foot in the end. I clenched my skirt tightly. Before I could speak, Shen Zhi Han knelt. First he gripped my hand. The tighter his grip became, the colder my heart grew. After a long time, one finger after another slowly released mine. I did not raise my head, but tears had already risen to the corners of my eyes. This son chooses the position of crown prince. The moment his words fell, I smiled and closed my eyes. The night wind passed through my empty fingers, cold enough to pierce my bones. I drew my hand back, hid it inside my sleeve, and lowered my head toward the blue stone under my knees. A drop of water fell, spreading into a small dark stain. Useless Cui Shi Yuan. How had I walked into my mother's old path again? Yet when I thought about it carefully, it was easy to understand. If he chose the position of crown prince, at least Shen Zhi Han could still live. If he chose me, leaving aside whether the emperor would spare us, would we be so lucky to avoid every blade that came afterward? At this point I did not even blame Shen Zhi Han. Was this what my mother had always meant? Do not blame your father, he has his own difficulties. I was simply sad. It was as though each time a boat reached the middle of a river, someone said, "It is too heavy, throw her overboard." I fell into the water, watched the boat travel farther and farther away, and slowly sank. I raised the back of my hand to wipe the corner of my eye, intending to fight for one final sliver of hope. But Shen Zhi Han's next words made my knees sink even more heavily into the ground. His voice was not loud, but it was strangely steady. Are you truly at ease with a crown prince who has no weakness at all? My hand stopped. The emperor frowned slightly but did not answer. Shen Zhi Han braced himself against the wall and slowly moved half a step forward. His knees trembled, his brow was still covered in cold sweat from his pain, and his face was sickly pale. Yet his eyes, usually cold as ice, burned then like two deep-shadowed flames. Has father never considered it? Now that this son has returned from hell, can you truly feel at ease letting someone sit in the position of crown prince with nothing at all binding him? Shen Zhi Han led him forward slowly, step by step. Hearing those words, my back had already become drenched with sweat, and the wind that passed over it felt even colder. Father might as well take her back with this son. This son is willing to offer his weakness to father. Lady Yuan is this son's weakness. If she lives, this son lives. If she dies, this son dies. Shen Zhi Han was trying to find a complete path for both of us in the narrow space between life and death. Father just said that a ruler has no blind spots only when no one stands behind him. Shen Zhi Han's voice remained even, neither fast nor slow. But this son is still the crown prince, while father is already a sovereign advanced in years and weakened in strength. He paused and tilted his head slightly to look at me. If father holds her, then father holds the son. At any time, you may use her to restrain this son. Father, would that not ensure this son's absolute loyalty to you? The lantern beneath the corridor was whipped hard by the wind and swayed violently. Light and shadow churned over every face. To place oneself in death first, then seek a path to life. Could Shen Zhi Han's move truly work? Could the old emperor fail to see through it? I only saw him knit his brows tightly, clasp his hands behind his back, and pace the courtyard. Shen Zhi Han simply looked straight at his father, neither evading him nor retreating. Of course the emperor understood his calculation. But he also had to consider making me into the collar tied around Shen Zhi Han's neck. A man willing to place a collar around his own neck was naturally more reassuring to a master than someone with no attachments. Even if those words were treasonous, this was an overt strategy with no possible counter. The emperor stopped pacing. "You truly have improved. Take her away." With those words, the emperor turned and left. The secret guards followed silently behind him. On the carriage back, Shen Zhi Han and I were separated. We did not even have a chance to exchange a word. As expected, the emperor kept me directly under his eye. I became a palace maid in Qianqing Palace. The supervising matron was surnamed Cui. She was over 50, and her eyes were as sharp as needles seeking poison. Whenever she looked at someone, the corners of her eyes slanted upward with coldness. She led me through one vermilion gate after another. Glazed tiles on both sides of the palace road reflected the moonlight and gave off a cold gleam. There were not many rules in Qianqing Palace. Matron Cui walked ahead without looking back. What you should not look at, do not look at. What you should not hear, do not hear. What you should not say, let it rot in your stomach. Only then did she turn to give me a glance. I lowered my eyes. Yes, she threw me into a small room at the far end of the rear quarters behind the eastern hall. It held only a wooden plank bed, a low table, and a copper basin. Its window faced the narrow passage between two palace walls, high and cramped. Moonlight squeezed through it, drawing a pale rectangle across the blue brick floor. I set my belongings at the head of the bed and sat on the board that was as hard as stone, looking around the room, which was scarcely larger than the woodshed at the separate residence. The most dangerous place was also the safest. During the entire journey into the palace, I had naturally understood Shen Zhi Han's calculation. Only one thing remained. I needed him to confirm it with his own mouth. So when Shen Zhi Han slipped into my room at midnight, I was not surprised at all. The door opened almost without a sound. A sliver of moonlight came through the gap, falling on his tall, lean figure, slightly bent. Once inside, he shut the door behind him. As he turned, his eyes met mine. Moonlight from the narrow window happened to fall across my face. I was leaning against the bedhead, fully dressed, a smile at the corner of my lips, clearly not someone awakened from sleep. He paused in surprise, his expression complicated. His back against the door, he tipped his head slightly and looked at me with an ingratiating smile. The corners of his eyes curved down a little, making him seem utterly innocent. Was Lady Yuan waiting for me? Yes. I was waiting for the faithless man who chose the position of crown prince. Sure enough, pain immediately showed on his face. Lady Yuan, I had no choice then. Men always had reasons they had no choice. Even though I vaguely understood his feelings for me, I had no intention of forgiving him easily. I deliberately sounded both angry and wounded. A faithless man is not allowed to call me that. He came to the bed, slowly crouched down, and then knelt beside my feet. I am sorry, he said. Even if it was only a temporary plan, it still made you feel abandoned. He looked up at me. From where I sat, every expression on his handsome face was clear. At that moment, there was a frankness about him that could soften anyone's heart. Lady Yuan, I know you are clever. You understood my intention long ago. I was too selfish. I did not want you to leave my side even for a moment. The position of crown prince abandoned me once. How could I still cling to it? All I thought of was staying with Lady Yuan for a long time. I said nothing, still looking down at him. When I did not answer, a trace of bitterness entered his smile. Cautiously, he reached out and lightly set his fingertips on the back of the hand resting on my knee. He did not grasp it, only touched it gently, like a cat that had done something wrong and was cautiously extending a paw to test its owner's mood. When I did not refuse, his fingers gradually closed around my hand. Lady Yuan, I have fallen deeply in love with you. I only hope your heart is the same as mine. Each word fell into the quiet night. Moonlight was like water, and the bright hall was as clear as our hearts. The answer I had wanted was laid bare by Shen Zhi Han without any reservation. At last I could not hold it in and laughed aloud. Lady Yuan, I reached out and pulled him sharply toward me. He was caught off guard and pitched forward, his hands instinctively bracing against the edge of the bed. I caught his collar, lifted my head and kissed him. He was stunned by the sudden gesture. In that brief hesitation, his lashes brushed my cheek. Then his breathing grew heavy. One hand left the bed and cradled the back of my neck, drawing me close. What began as a startled acceptance became a deliberate answer. His other arm came around my waist and pulled me down from the bed's edge until I nearly fell fully into his arms. Lady Yuan. His lips hovered near mine, his voice hoarse enough to be almost indistinct. Lady Yuan. Yes, Lady Yuan hears you. At some point we had fallen onto the bed, forehead to forehead, our breaths mingling. Have you forgiven me? He asked. What is there for me to forgive? I looked at him with playful eyes. He was stunned for a moment, then laughed. His forehead slid from mine as he buried his face in the hollow of my neck. His warm breath brushed my collarbone and made me ticklish, so I shrank my neck instinctively. What are you laughing at? I laughed because I thought I was very clever. His voice was low against my shoulder, but from beginning to end you saw through me. Then he leaned close again and cautiously kissed the center of my forehead. Lady Yuan, he said, his voice low and grave, you and I will never part. We will never abandon each other. The task Matron Cui assigned me was to sweep the corridor outside the West Warm Pavilion of Qianqing Palace. It was an inconspicuous task. Whenever the emperor handled state affairs, I could only kneel far away beneath the corridor. But I was not in a hurry. Palace maids in Qianqing Palace had the advantage of being close to the water and seeing the moon first. In the tea room, at the corners of the corridors, and during the brief moments when I swept the courtyard, seemingly trivial scraps of news were always linked by countless tangled threads. Every 3 to 5 days, Shen Zhi Han came to Qianqing Palace to pay his respects. Outside the palace, he had been given a residence of his own. Yet everyone in Qianqing Palace knew that Crown Prince Shen Zhi Han and the concubine-born daughter, sent to marry in another's place, had become complete strangers. The emperor had brought that concubine-born daughter into the palace as a maid, which was plainly a slap across Marquise Cui's face. The crown prince also behaved as though she did not exist. Even Matron Cui often gossiped in secret that the concubine-born daughter was pitiful. She had thought she could cling to a high branch, only to be trampled into the mud in the end. Whenever I heard it, I merely smiled to myself. There was a second-rank palace maid in Qianqing Palace named Cui Jis. She was fairly pretty and ambitious. She specialized in attending to brush and ink before the emperor, secretly accepted bribes, and occasionally leaked a little information from important memorials to the outside. When I discovered that she was associating with the princes, I did not say a word. One day when she brought fresh tea before the emperor, I casually said to Matron Cui, Sister Cui's jade bracelet is so beautiful. Its jade is so clear and translucent. This is the first time in my life I have ever seen one like it. As I said it, I wore a simple, guileless expression, my eyes shining as I watched Cui Ji's retreating figure. Matron Cui had spent 30 years struggling through the palace. She gave me one glance. Not long afterward, Cui Ji was taken away. That very day, the fourth prince submitted a memorial accusing Shen Zhi Han. Before the emperor had even finished reading it, he threw it violently to the ground, rebuked the fourth prince for harboring malicious intentions and forming factions, and confined him for 1 month. That afternoon, after sweeping the last stretch of corridor, I was about to return to the rear quarters. As I passed a turn near the eastern hall, a hand suddenly reached from the darkness and pulled me into the narrow passage between 2 palace walls. The passage was so narrow that it only held enough space for 2 people to stand facing one another. I was pressed against the cold blue brick wall. Shen Zhi Han planted one hand beside my ear and blocked me completely with his body. His breathing was rapid, his chest rising and falling. The matter with Cui Ji? He asked in a lowered voice. You did it. Yes. I met his eyes calmly. The light in the narrow passage was dim. His hand left the wall and gently took my shoulder. Do you know what will happen if you are discovered? His voice was taut. This is a palace that devours people. I gave a soft laugh and raised my hand to pat his chest. What is it? Are you afraid? He did not smile. I am very afraid, he said. When I received the news, my palms were covered in sweat. I raised a hand to cup his face. The motion made him pause. Shen Zhi Han, I said softly, I may be your weakness, but I am not a good person. He lowered his eyes to meet mine, his throat moving slightly. I want to help you. I spoke very slowly. You exposed the third prince's planted agents, eliminated the fourth prince's informants, and drove a wedge between the second prince and consort Xian. I know all of it, but I am not afraid, so you must not be afraid either. The hand holding mine tightened abruptly. After returning to the capital, he had indeed become what his father wanted. Decisive as a blade, calculating and ruthless. Do you find me despicable? He asked, lowering his head. I shook mine. You act decisively in court. I will help you clear the obstacles in the inner palace. Your hands are already stained. Mine are not clean either. He lowered his eyes, his lashes trembling faintly in the dim light and shadow. We have no path back. I looked at him. You do not need to pretend to be good in front of me, and I will not pretend to be a lamb in front of you. Come on, your hands are cold. Come to my room and I will warm them." That night, he sat on the narrow wooden bed in my room, held my face in both hands and rested his forehead against mine for a long time. Then he buried his face in my hair, his voice slightly hoarse. "Every time I do those things outside, I must come and see you when I return. Only when I see you do I know that I have not changed." Changed into what? Into a monster. He closed his eyes, one whose eyes hold only power and whose heart holds only schemes. My nose stung. I drew him behind the bed curtains and made my trust clear in the most direct way I could. "We are husband and wife, after all, my prince." He hesitated, still seeking my certainty. "Are you sure?" In answer, I put my arms around his neck. "Be quiet." That long night, the vast palace darkness hid countless things stirring into motion. In the small, unnoticed rear room, we held each other tightly and consummated our marriage. Later in the night, he held me in his arms. The narrow wooden bed creaked under our shared weight. His arm wrapped around my shoulders so that my head rested in the hollow of his shoulder. From time to time he kissed the top of my hair, still tender after the warmth we had shared. "Lady Yuan," he called. "Yes? Do not do such dangerous things again in the future. That depends on my mood." He gave a helpless laugh. "You truly cannot be moved by softness or hardness." He kissed my forehead lightly, then pulled the quilt higher to cover my bare shoulders. The road ahead was still shrouded in uncertainty. But at that moment, within the small space enclosed by his arms, I felt completely at peace. The emperor's health began to collapse. At first, in winter, it was only a chill. The Imperial Medical Institute prescribed several courses of medicine, but none helped. Gradually, it became a persistent cough. Every night he coughed so violently that it seemed to tear him apart, and there was blood mixed in. The chief imperial physician secretly shook his head at the chief eunuch. The atmosphere in Qianqing Palace grew heavier by the day. Even the palace maids walked without daring to make a sound. When the news spread beyond the palace, the abacuses in the noble residences clacked endlessly. It was at that very time that father came to find me. He presented a palace entry token and said he wished to see his third daughter once. When Matron Kui came to deliver the message, her expression was a little strange. She perhaps thought this marquis was truly too shameless. I met him at the small west side gate of Qianqing Palace. Father wore a dark blue common robe that had faded halfway with age, and there was more gray at his temples than when I had returned home after my wedding. When he saw me step out of the gate, he froze. Perhaps he had not expected me to be wearing the uniform of the lowest-ranked palace maid, without even a single hairpin in my hair. "Yuan," he said, deliberately making his voice gentle. "Father." I bowed, neither obsequious nor flattering. He exchanged a few pleasantries. Seeing that my manner remained cold, he finally showed impatience. "Yuan, father has come today because there is something important." I did not answer. I only looked at him quietly. He glanced around and lowered his voice. "Does Shen Zhi Han treat you badly?" "Yes," I replied. "Not merely badly. He has thrown me away like a worn-out shoe and treats me as a stranger." Father nodded, as if he had expected it. "Father knows you are a clever child. The emperor's body cannot hold out much longer. The moment he breathes his last, the imperial edict will decide the empire." I lowered my eyes, my lashes trembling faintly. After waiting so long, father had finally walked into the snare I had set for him himself. The imperial edict is hidden behind the plaque in the main hall of Qianqing Palace. Only the chief yush knows its exact location. But you are in Qianqing Palace. Sooner or later, an opportunity will come. Once you obtain the edict, there is no need to change much. You only need to alter the name of the successor slightly." He paused, then added another line to tempt me. "If the matter succeeds, father will arrange for you to leave the palace. Your elder sister's household will also allow you to enter their residence, as a concubine." I lowered my head, the corner of my mouth lifting faintly. My biological father wanted me to commit an act that could bring the execution of the entire family, and the price he offered was to let me become a concubine in a noble household. He even believed that this would be a step up for me. I truly wanted to tell him that the emperor's declining health was because I had poisoned him. Those people always looked down from above, forcing insects like us to live in trembling fear of death, so that even our lives were no more than borrowed time. Yet an insect like me had courage as vast as the sky. I was merely returning their methods to them. Even Shen Zhi Han did not know. I raised my head and smiled, grateful and aggrieved at once. "Your daughter will follow father's instructions." When father left, his steps were noticeably lighter. Perhaps he believed that his plan had become more secure. The instant he turned away, the smile vanished from my face. From that day on, I began giving father false information. At what hour the chief eunuch changed shifts each day. When the guards of the main hall were replaced, which plaque hid the brocade box. Every piece of information mixed truth with falsehood, but sounded complete and convincing. Father believed it all without the slightest doubt. At the same time, I began imitating the emperor's handwriting, stroke by stroke. The force and spirit within handwriting were difficult to copy, but from the day I entered Qianqing Palace, I had secretly collected the emperor's discarded drafts. Now I selected only the characters I needed and practiced them relentlessly. I practiced until my wrist ached, until sweat soaked my brow, until every dot and sweep matched the imperial hand exactly, without the slightest deviation. On the night the emperor died, Qianqing Palace blazed with light. Imperial physicians knelt across the entire courtyard, and the princes were urgently summoned into the palace from their residences. Matron Kui instructed me to prepare tea in a side hall for the princes to drink while they discussed matters. When I carried the tea tray to the door of the side hall, voices arguing could already be heard inside. The first prince spoke sharply, insisting that the imperial edict had to be opened jointly by the imperial clan. The suspicious third prince believed that only the chief eunuch had been present when their father was dying. The fourth prince gave a cold laugh. Who knows whether that eunuch has tampered with anything? Shen Zhi Han glanced at me but said nothing, continuing to keep watch beside the dragon bed of the emperor. I carried the tea tray back to the tea room, closed the door, and sat quietly in the dark. At exactly the second watch, the morning bell rang. Its sound came from the tower at the Meridian Gate in heavy drawn-out waves. 45 tolls announced the national mourning. The emperor had died. In the main hall of Qianqing Palace, wails rose to the heavens. The princes knelt across the floor, and the consorts wept as though their hearts were breaking. Eunuchs and palace maids lay prostrate on the ground, their foreheads pressed to the cold golden bricks. The chief eunuch lifted a brocade box from behind the plaque. Everyone's eyes fixed on it, each pair bloodshot. The box was opened, and the imperial edict wrapped in bright yellow silk was respectfully removed. With trembling hands, the chief eunuch unfolded the edict. His shrill voice echoed through the main hall. I, having received heaven's mandate, have ruled from the throne for 40 years. Now my allotted years are at an end, and I die in Qianqing Palace. Second Prince Shen Zhi Han was born humane and filial and closely resembles me. I command him to inherit my imperial foundation and ascend the throne as emperor. Furthermore, the former crown princess Cui Shiyuan is gentle in character and conduct, diligent and careful. She is hereby invested as Empress of the Central Palace. At that point, even the chief eunuch froze. The entire hall immediately erupted in commotion. Father, who knelt in a corner of the hall, suddenly lifted his head. His eyes widened like bells and his gaze shot through the fort of brocade robes and jade belts in the hall, straight toward the doorway. I stood beneath the corridor. Through the open palace doors, our eyes met. I smiled brilliantly. Father, you did not expect this, did you? The student had surpassed the master. I truly had altered the imperial edict. The edict had indeed originally named Shen Zhi Han as the successor, but it had granted me 3 chi of white silk, an order for my death. That damned old emperor had refused to let me go even at the very end. Fortunately, I had acted first. No matter how hard Shen Zhi Han's heart was, it would be difficult for him not to soften when it came to killing my father. I could not place my fate in anyone's hands, even the hands of the man I loved. Father opened his mouth, but in the end he closed his eyes and bowed his head to the ground. He had chosen the wrong side. The only thing left was to walk that road to the end. But I had never stood on his road. Shen Zhi Han and I stood side by side on the vermilion steps before the main hall of Qianqing Palace. Ministers and officials knelt across the hall. Their cries of, "Long live the emperor!" thundered so loudly that the roof beams seemed to hum and shake. He wore a bright yellow dragon robe. I wore the Empress's ceremonial regalia, which the Vice Minister of Rites respectfully offered with both hands. It had been kept in storage for some unknown future empress. In the rush, only a few stitches had been altered, yet it fit me perfectly. We turned our heads to look at one another, and without planning it, both reached out our hands. In lowered voices we said, "Why does this feel like conspiring to do something evil?" He paused in surprise, then the corner of his mouth rose. "What conspiracy? This is the dragon and phoenix achieving success together." I lowered my eyes to the ceremonial regalia I wore, then looked up at him. A black dragon and an evil phoenix are quite a good match too. Sunlight poured through the palace doors, making the golden bricks shine brilliantly. The ministers were still bowing their heads and crying, "Long live the emperor." No one noticed that the new emperor tipped his head and, quick as lightning, kissed the empress's lips. He straightened, adjusted his crown and robes, and returned to the solemn, unsmiling face of a ruler in court. Only his ears had quietly turned a faint red. Tonight, allow me to wait upon the Empress. I pressed my lips together to hide a smile. I had said before that once he could stand, he would have to wait on me in return. Approved. On the third day after Shen Zhi Han ascended the throne, he suddenly announced that he would take me somewhere. He made such a mystery of it that I was a little speechless. The imperial carriage left the city and headed west, traveling farther and farther into desolation. The guards and officials who followed exchanged puzzled looks. Only I knew where this road led. The locust grove in the western outskirts was unchanged, yet that separate residence had been repaired. He stopped before a grave deep in the locust woods. It was newly built, its mound encircled with blue stone. The grave marker was made from the finest white marble. Incense, candles, and offerings had already been arranged before it. He had clearly ordered them prepared in advance. The inscription had been freshly carved and filled with gold paint, gleaming faintly in the thin winter sunlight. It read, "Grave of Cui Wu Lan Yin, the late mother." Wu Lan Yin was my mother's name. Beside it was another, smaller line in Shen Zhi Han's hand, a compassionate female physician of Qingzhou who saved the world, erected by her daughter, Cui Shiyuan. 3 sticks of incense burned before the grave, their blue smoke curling upward. Dressed in a pale blue ordinary robe, Shen Zhi Han knelt before the marker. Honored mother-in-law above, today this humble son-in-law swears here, for as long as I live, Lady Yuan will be Empress, and no one may change that. When I am gone, she will still be the most honored woman under heaven. No one may slight her. After he rose, he put an arm around my shoulders and said softly, "The Imperial Medical Institute will reprint your mother's medical books and put her name on them. You do not need to worry for her any longer." Tears silently covered my face. I looked up at the old locust tree. The cold wind passed through and its branches swayed gently, as if nodding. "Mother, did you see? Your daughter did not walk in your footsteps." When the wind is strong enough, even a paper kite can struggle free and soar into the blue sky. The reckoning with the Marquis's manor came half a month later. Shen Zhi Han did not make a spectacle of it. He merely ordered the Grand Secretariat to draft several imperial edicts. The Marquis was old and was permitted to resign his office, return to his hometown, and spend his remaining years in retirement. The Marquis's legitimate son was transferred to a county in the southwest as an assistant magistrate, and ordered to depart immediately. As for the marriage between my elder sister and the Marquis of Yangyi's household, the other party voluntarily returned the betrothal document, citing incompatible birth horoscopes. My principal mother was required to hand over the keys to the ancestral hall for the clan to discuss and choose someone virtuous to manage it instead. Sometimes death is not the best punishment. The Marquis' manor had been stripped of all power. Father's return to his hometown sounded honorable, but for a family that had lived in the capital generation after generation, those words meant being uprooted completely. Power was what he had valued most all his life. This outcome hurt more than killing him. My legitimate elder brother was transferred to the post of assistant magistrate in the southwest. The southwest had miasma, unrest, poor mountains, and treacherous waters. An assistant magistrate was only an 8th-rank official, many ranks below the lofty, leisurely capital position he had once held, and he would have to travel thousands of miles from the capital to the farthest ends of the land. He could not endure hardship, but he would have to endure it. My principal mother had commanded the back courtyard all her life. In the end, she was not even allowed to step through the doors of her own family's Buddhist shrine. As for my legitimate elder sister, the Ministry of Rights struck her name from the list for the imperial consort selection and simply left her there. At a spring banquet, Shen Zhi Han casually made an ambiguous remark. "The Marquis' legitimate daughter remains unmarried. I will consider it slowly." It was like dangling a carrot before a donkey, forever visible, forever out of reach. He made her see it without being able to have it, leaving her suspended day and night in hope. Later I heard that my elder sister smashed an entire room, destroyed all the cosmetics in her dressing box, tore the brocades into pieces, and screamed madly in the courtyard. She rushed into father's study, grabbed his sleeve, cried and made a scene, begging him to enter the palace and plead for mercy, begging him to find her another marriage. Father sat in his chair without saying a word. He only looked at the locust tree outside the window, his eyes empty like those of a dead man. What was he remembering? Was it the simple village physician he had once found so easy to deceive, or the concubine-born daughter sent to marry in another's place, whom he had personally placed on the blue cloth-covered donkey cart and sent out the gate? He never again left the house in his hometown. Each day he only sat blankly in the courtyard. The servants said that sometimes he muttered words to himself that no one could understand. As for how to deal with the Empress Dowager, Shen Zhi Han considered it for a long time. That night he was reviewing memorials in the West Warm Pavilion of Qianqing Palace. He worked until late, then suddenly set down his brush and stood before the window for a long time. Beyond it, endless darkness lay over the forbidden city and palace lights flickered in the wind. "Regarding Mother," he said softly. "I have thought about it for a long time. What have you decided?" "I cannot kill her. I know what she did. She knew my eldest brother tortured me, but she did not stop him. She knew my third brother sent people to kill me, but she did not stop him either. After you entered the palace, she secretly investigated your background and once meant to act against you. Only the late emperor stopped her. But in the end, she is still my mother. When I had a high fever as a child, she stayed by my bed without sleeping for 3 days and 3 nights. When I made a mistake, she wept and begged Father to spare me. Those good things were real too." I covered the back of his hand with mine. "Then do not kill her." He turned to look at me. "There are ways not to kill someone," I said. "Then make sure she can never stir up trouble again." He was silent for a while, then nodded. The next day, he issued an edict retaining the Empress Dowager's honorific title and moving her to Shokong Palace to spend her old age in comfort. It was called rest and recuperation, but in truth it was house arrest. She could only live out the rest of her days beneath that square stretch of sky. At times, as she counted prayer beads in the Buddhist shrine, she would suddenly stop and ask the matron beside her, "Is the emperor well today?" The matron would answer, "His Majesty is well." Then she would ask, "Has the Empress come?" The matron would reply, "No, Your Majesty." She would fall silent, lower her head, and continue counting the Buddhist beads. 108 beads passed through her fingers again and again, yet neither her son nor her daughter-in-law ever came. Of all the brothers, the third prince met the most miserable end. He colluded with court officials, bribed the imperial guards, moved troops toward the capital without authorization while the late emperor was critically ill, and sent men to assassinate the crown prince. The evidence was overwhelming. Every crime deserved death. He knelt in the middle of the hall with an ashen face, unable to offer a single defense. He had believed Shen Zhi Han might spare him for the sake of brotherhood. But if someone had acted on the first day of the lunar month, why should anyone else not act on the 15th? The third prince was stripped of his title, reduced to a commoner, and sentenced to the brutal 5-horse capital punishment. Of the remaining brothers, those who deserved death were put to death, those who deserved imprisonment were imprisoned, and those who deserved mercy were spared. After everything had been dealt with, we shared private time together in Cunning Palace. Then he wrapped his arms around my waist from behind and rested his chin in the hollow of my shoulder. "It is all settled," he said, his low voice full of exhaustion. "Yes." I patted the hand around my waist. "Do you think I find you too cruel, Shen Zhi Han?" I turned to face him and smiled without smiling. "Why are you pretending to be a big bad wolf in front of me?" He stared for a moment, then burst out laughing so hard that even his shoulders shook. "Lady Yuan," I had only just stopped laughing, tears still at the corners of my eyes from it. "Now that you are the Empress, could you speak a little more decorously?" "I am very decorous with other people." I brushed my fingers lightly over his collarbone. "But with you I do not need to be." His laughter carried through the dusk. He drew me closer, lowered his head, and kissed my forehead softly. I leaned against his chest, breathing in the faint scent of ambergris incense clinging to him. Beyond the distant palace walls, dusk deepened inch by inch. Crane calls echoed through the pale sky. The paper kite, carrying the years gone by, sheltered with him beneath one roof through wind and rain. No one has ever mourned abandoned chess pieces, yet a lonely paper kite came to rest upon the crane's shoulder. In the deeply sorrowful palace, the night watches are still short, but 10 interlaced fingers speak more than 1,000 words. If anyone asked what this love was like, it was a paper kite tied to a fallen feather, riding the wind into the high sky. Never to fly alone, never to fall alone. We do not ask to grow old together in this mortal world. We ask only to return together. Thank you for supporting Panda. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring you more amazing stories. Now, let's begin story 2. I was the true legitimate daughter of the Marquis of Zhengzu's household, the child who had been mistaken for another. 15 years earlier, the greedy head housekeeper had seized an opportunity amid the chaos and substituted her own biological daughter for me. That low-born child rose to become a cherished branch of gold and jade, while I was left to drift alone until a modest merchant couple took me in and raised me. Last year, my adoptive parents passed away. They pitied me for having no one to rely on, yet feared that relatives from outside the family line would covet our property. Before they closed their eyes for the last time, they carefully instructed me to spread a false rumor. That the family business had gone badly, debts had piled up, and we had finally gone bankrupt, so destitute that we did not even have the money to buy coffins. Once the news spread, everyone around us believed that Song Jinju had become a penniless orphan with not even a single copper coin to her name. Thanks to that performance, I lived in peace, until the Marquise's estate sent a battered old carriage to fetch me back to the capital. Dusk had already settled by the time I carried my worn cloth bundle across the vermilion and gold threshold of the Marquis of Zhengguo's estate. The fragrance of sandalwood incense drifted from the magnificent main hall. Yet beneath that noble scent, the scene before me was noisy and theatrical, like a ridiculous opera troupe. In the middle of the hall, Song Jiwei wore a splendid gown of cloud-patterned brocade. The jade hairpin in her coiffure trembled with each choked sob. She was kneeling on the blue-glazed tiles, tears soaking the hem of her dress as she clutched old Madame's skirt with both hands. "Grandmother, mother, Jiwei is ill-fated. I occupied elder sister's place for so many years." While elder sister suffered outside as the daughter of struggling merchants, her adoptive parents went bankrupt, fell into debt, and died in poverty. Now that elder sister has returned, she must have endured so much grievance. I am only a cuckoo chick in another bird's nest. How can I still have the face to live in luxury? Please take pity on me. Give me a strip of white silk so that I may surrender all this glory and make amends to elder sister. Her words sounded reasonable and full of concern for her family. Yet every sentence artfully brought up the words merchant, bankruptcy, debt and poverty, pressing them into the ears of everyone in the room who cared so deeply about appearances. Sure enough, the Marchioness who sat beside her immediately bent down and gathered Song Jiwei into her arms. Her gaze passed over the patched hemp clothes I wore, then dropped to the mud-stained cloth shoes on my feet. The corner of her mouth twitched in undisguised contempt. "What are you crying for?" The Marchioness patted Song Jiwei and admonished her gently. "You are the precious jewel I raised with my own hands. You are accomplished in music, chess, calligraphy, and painting. Everything about your speech and bearing meets the standards of a noble young lady. How could someone connected to vulgar merchants bringing the bad luck of bankruptcy into this house ever compare to your temperament? In this Marquise of Zhengguo estate you will forever be the second miss." Then she turned sharply toward me. A frost-like chill settled over her face. "Now that you have crossed this threshold, put away your coarse habits. The household will arrange a courtyard in the rear compound for you to rest in. Remember your place. You are absolutely forbidden from coveting anything that belongs to Jiwei or bullying her." I stood where I was and lowered my head slightly. Beneath my rough sleeves, I pressed my thumb hard into my palm. The sting made my eyes redden at once, and a thin mist gathered in them. I sniffed and carefully dabbed at the corners of my eyes with my sleeve. "Madame is right. Your daughter will remember every word." My voice was soft and obedient, trembling like a lamb standing before a pack of wolves. Why should younger sister Jiwei blame herself? I am alone in the world, bearing the name of a bankrupt debtor. The Marquis' household has kindly taken me in and given me food and clothing. That alone is a blessing earned over 3 lifetimes. How could I dare dream of competing with younger sister for glory and wealth? I hesitated, then timidly lifted my eyes to look around the magnificent hall. My chest rose and fell slightly as I let out a sorrowful sigh. It is only that I worry for the Marquise's reputation. I worry even more for younger sister's future. The Marchioness's carefully shaped brows drew into a straight line. "What do you mean by that?" I stepped forward half a pace and lightly touched the patched piece of cloth on my shoulder. My voice grew more choked with emotion. "Your daughter was born poor. Eating coarse food and wearing rough cloth are habits carved into my bones. I can endure a little hardship. But the Marquis of Zhengguo's household is illustrious. Its visitors are princes, young lords, and titled ladies. What if, one day, I am ordered to receive guests in the main hall or must go out into the streets? The ladies will see that the dignified eldest daughter of the Marquis' household dresses like a beggar, wears a dull wooden hairpin, and carries a torn bundle." I paused and carefully watched the change in the Marchioness's expression. "They will certainly gossip. They will laugh that the Marquis is miserly and mistreats his own blood. They will say that the estate looks glamorous on the outside, yet its household is so depleted that it cannot even provide a proper outfit for its legitimate daughter." Old Madame had been silent on the rosewood daybed. She shifted slightly, and the hand that had been turning her Buddhist prayer beads suddenly stopped. I knew the first spark had caught. I turned slowly toward the bewildered Song Jiwei and delivered a second, gentler thrust. Besides, younger sister Jiwei is beautiful as a celestial maiden and excels in music, chess, calligraphy, and painting. She has nearly reached the age to discuss marriage. If her future husband's family sees that her elder sister in this house is dressed in such shabby poverty, they may suspect that our marquis household is empty within. They may look down on us, reduce the betrothal gifts, and treat younger sister with contempt. For the sake of the whole family and for younger sister's future, as her elder sister, even if people laugh at me today for being greedy and hungry for money, I must still make this request. I straightened my back and raised my voice clearly. According to the rules of a marquis household, each young lady receives 20 taels of silver each month as spending money, 4 bolts of fine silk each quarter to make clothing, and seasonal gold and silver jewelry. I spent 15 years wandering outside. Naturally, I have never received so much as a coin. Counting only the monthly allowance, the sum comes to roughly 3,600 taels. I clasped my hands before my chest and bowed deeply. I beg, madam, to consider the marquise's reputation in official circles and younger sister Jiwei's dignity when she marries. Please give me this money soon, so that I can have clothes tailored and purchase a few jade-set hairpins. I must make myself presentable as quickly as possible, so that when I go outside, people will see the marquis household's generosity and magnanimity, rather than think poorly of the family. The entire hall fell silent. Even the wind stirring the parasol trees outside seemed painfully clear. My words were mild, humble, and so tightly reasoned that not a drop of water could slip through them. I was plainly demanding money on the first day I entered the household, but the outer wrapping was filial devotion to the family and sacrifice for my younger sister. I had struck directly at the Marchioness's two most vulnerable points: her husband's reputation and the future of the false daughter she hoped would become the honored wife of a powerful family. The Marchioness's face went from pale white to blazing red. The word no caught in her throat, and no matter how hard she tried, she could not force it out. To refuse me now would be like slapping herself in the face, and admitting that the marquis household had grown so impoverished it could not provide a few thousand taels. More importantly, if word spread that she, the biological mother, had mistreated her own daughter, what family would still dare take Song Jiwei as a daughter-in-law? But 3,600 taels in cash. Behind the cloth that covered half my face, the corner of my lips lifted faintly. I had grown up in business. One glance at the faded curtains that had not been replaced, or the old porcelain displayed in the main hall, was enough for me to understand that this once famous, imposing estate had long been rotten within. Where am I supposed to find 3,600 taels in cash and hand it to you right now? The Marchioness ground out through clenched teeth, her chest heaving. She shot a glare at the head housekeeper waiting nearby. Understanding at once, the old woman bent over awkwardly, trembling as she took the bronze key from her waist and headed toward the side storeroom. A long while later, she came out again, carrying a small lacquered tray in both hands. Sweat beaded across her forehead. The Marchioness reached for the thin stack of banknotes on the tray, looked at them with obvious pain, and slapped them heavily down onto the rosewood tea table. "Take them," she snapped, each word hissing through her teeth. "I have many matters to attend to, and the accounts office has already closed its books for the day. There are 5 banknotes here, each worth 100 taels. I am advancing them to you for clothing and jewelry. Once the old steward has checked the accounts, I will order the rest delivered. Take the silver, then obediently return to your courtyard. Stop playing word games." I blinked and approached the table with a look of delighted timidity. I carefully gathered the 5 banknotes and tucked them deep inside my bodice. Then I turned to the maidservant standing nearby. "Could I borrow an inkstone and a brush, sister?" The maid looked blankly at the Marchioness. Only after the Marchioness waved her hand in irritation did she dare bring over the brush and ink tray. I took the brush, dipped it in black ink, and quickly wrote several lines on the back of a sheet of paper. Once I had finished, I smiled, lifted the sheet in both hands and carefully set it back on the tea table. "Madam handles public and private affairs with such distinction. Your daughter greatly admires you. I will accept these 500 taels as a deposit. This is a promissory note for the remaining 3,100 taels, so that the accounts office does not forget once its books grow busy. Please forgive the caution of a merchant's daughter." Before the Marchioness could fly into a rage, I bowed with impeccable form. "Thank you, madam, for opening your purse for the good of the family. I will certainly dress with dignity and splendor, so that younger sister will be able to hold her head high before the world when she marries." With that, I turned around. lifted my tattered bundle, and followed the old servant woman out of the main hall. The silence behind me was so deep that it felt suffocating. As I walked along the bluestone corridor, I lightly touched my chest and felt the warmth of the 5 banknotes I had just acquired. Only a short while earlier I had entered the gates as a bankrupt, impoverished wretch. Only a short while later I had pried 500 taels of silver from a tiger's mouth. I raised my head and looked at the crescent moon, rising above the estate's glazed tile roofs. The courtyard assigned to me stood in the most remote northwest corner of the property. The plaque above the entrance bore 3 words, Cold Bamboo Courtyard. More than half the red paint had peeled from the pillars, and weeds crept from the base of the walls all the way to the steps. The Marchioness had told the servants to clean everything thoroughly for the first miss. In truth, the bedding smelled of damp mildew, and the warming charcoal was the most choking, smoky kind thrown up from the kitchen. The desolation itself did not concern me. What stood out most were the 2 coarse old servant women standing in the courtyard with their arms folded against the cold. One was surnamed Wang, the other Zhang. They were the Marchioness's dowry maids, supposedly sent to attend to my daily needs. The truth was obvious. They were hunting dogs sent to probe me. The Marquis and Marchioness were old foxes who had spent years navigating the capital. They certainly did not fully believe the rumor that I had gone bankrupt and starved. In their eyes, a merchant couple, who had worked in business their whole lives, pouring blood and sweat into the marketplace for decades, could not possibly die without leaving behind a single land deed, a scrap of property, or some savings hidden at the bottom of a chest. They wanted to search me and force my hidden wealth into the open. Unfortunately for them, I had grown up among account books and calculations. I had long learned how to play a part and tailor my words to the person before me. They wanted a bitter drama. I would give them one. At mealtime, Nanny Zhang brought in a wooden tray holding a bowl of rice mixed with coarse millet and a plate of yellowing greens without a drop of oil. She stood with her arms folded, watching my expression closely. I showed neither anger nor disgust. My eyes lit up as though a starving person had found gold. I snatched up the bamboo chopsticks and crammed the food into my mouth, scraping the bowl clean down to the final drop of vegetable broth. As I ate, I hunched my shoulders and glanced around furtively as if I feared someone might rush in and steal even this miserable bowl of food. At the sight of my crude, ravenous eating, Nanny Zhang's mouth twitched. She secretly turned away and spat beneath the bamboo tree. The performance did not end there. A few days later, while I was out walking in the garden, Nanny Wang used the excuse of cleaning the room to rummage through the space beneath my bed, the bedding, and the pillows. Of course, no land deeds or banknotes could be found, no matter how hard she searched. What she pulled from a cracked gap beneath the bed was half a steamed bun, covered in cobwebs and hard as stone. Nanny Wang threw it to the ground and scolded loudly. "First miss, why are you hiding this filthy rubbish? Are you trying to lure rats and insects into the courtyard to chew the whole place to pieces?" I had just entered from outside. When I saw the scene, I rushed forward in panic. I knelt on the cold tiles and clutched the dirty half-bun, tidying it inside my clothes. My whole body trembled. "Nanny Wang, please have mercy. Do not throw it away." I raised my tear-streaked face, my voice breaking with sobs. "Last year, the creditors hired men to seize our belongings. My parents died sick on a torn mat. I was starved for 3 days and 3 nights. I had to rummage through rubbish heaps for leftovers and scraps of broth. I am terrified. I am afraid that the Marchioness will dislike my coarseness tomorrow and turn me out into the streets. Please let me keep this little bit of food for an emergency." Nanny Wang froze. Extreme contempt flashed in her eyes. She backed away 2 steps, hastily dusting off her clothes as though she feared my poverty might contaminate her. Then she spun around and left Cold Bamboo Courtyard. On the night of the full moon that month, cold wind shrieked through the window cracks. I deliberately put on a thin layer of clothing and sat hugging my knees beside the door, staring at the grayish moonlight. When the shadow of the night patrol servant hovered outside the corridor, I began to sob. Tears fell onto my old bundle. "Father, Mother, the Marquis of Zhengguo's estate is magnificent. But every night, your daughter dreams that debt collectors will come with knives and kill me. They have already traced the debt of 20,000 taels to the capital. What am I supposed to do? If they come and smash the gates of the Marquis estate, old Madam will surely beat me to death and sell me to a brothel." My mournful crying carried through the corridor and straight into the ears of the person hiding behind a pavilion pillar. That shadow paused, then hurriedly turned and vanished into the night. The very next morning, the entire Marquis household changed its attitude toward me. Old Madame ordered the gates of my courtyard tightly shut. Unless there was something urgent, I was absolutely forbidden to step into the main hall. When the Marchioness heard that I had brought along a debt of 20,000 taels, her face went green with fear. She immediately withdrew every maid and senior servant who had been supervising me. They completely lowered their guard. They treated me as though I were a source of contagion. The Song family fully believed that Song Jinju was truly a poor, timid, starving little rat carrying a mountain of debt and waiting to die. The title of eldest daughter of the Marquis' household became nothing but an empty name. No one was willing to care about me or keep watch over me. They wanted to lock me away and forget me. By chance, that suited my plans perfectly. At the third watch of the night, darkness lay thick over the capital. I removed my rough silk sleeping clothes and changed into the neat dark clothes of a junior laundry maid. I took the wooden hairpin from my head and reeded my hair into a simple braid. Then I quietly pushed open the side window of cold bamboo courtyard. Dense trees grew close to the rear wall, where there was a small wooden gate used to carry fertilizer and refuse in and out. At this hour, the gatekeepers were already fast asleep beside their jars of rice wine. I slipped through the narrow gate and merged into the silent darkness of the streets. The cold wind whipped at my face, but it could not diminish the flame of excitement burning in my chest. I walked briskly across 2 broad streets, then turned into a flagstone alley hidden behind the red lanterns of the Four Seas Tavern. Before a tightly closed, weathered black wooden door, I knocked in a pattern. 3 long knocks, 2 short ones, then another long knock. The door bolt clicked. The door creaked open a narrow crack, and an old man with graying hair and a face deeply lined by experience peered out. The moment he saw me, his eyes brightened. He hurriedly stepped aside and welcomed me in, then carefully slid the iron bolt back into place. "First, miss, you have finally come." Uncle Shen's voice trembled and his aged eyes reddened. He bent to bow, but I immediately reached out and supported his thin arm. Uncle Shen had served my adoptive parents faithfully all his life. On the surface, he played the role of a poor old gatekeeper, guarding a shabby, abandoned shop, enduring the contemptuous looks of the nearby locals. In truth, he was the blade hidden in my sleeve, the only person in the world who knew the identity of the true owner controlling this entire enterprise. After crossing the narrow courtyard, I entered the outer hall of Ruyan Pavilion. This cosmetics shop had a morning notice hanging outside. Its storefront was sealed with nailed wooden boards, and the pillars were covered in dust and cobwebs, making it appear ruined. Yet the hall within presented an entirely different scene. Everything was clean and orderly. Rows of dark hardwood shelves displayed porcelain jars of carefully preserved ingredients for making cosmetics. The scent of magnolia and jasmine drifted through the air. I sat slowly on the rosewood dabbed in the middle of the room and accepted a steaming cup of tea from Uncle Shen. "How are things outside?" I asked after taking a sip. Uncle Shen stood with his hands folded beside the table and gave his report in a clear voice. "According to the owner's instructions, the 2 head shopkeepers, who intended to betray us and secretly embezzle ingredients, have been frightened half to death by the threat of their contracts of servitude. They have packed their belongings and gone back to their hometowns. They would never dare utter a word. The 8 most skilled craftsmen in the shop remain on duty in the rear workshop. They are eating and sleeping there, waiting for orders to begin production." I nodded in satisfaction. Reaching inside my bodice, I took out the 5 100-tael banknotes wrapped in silk and tapped them lightly on the wooden table. Uncle Shen looked at the banknotes, surprise flashing in his eyes. "Owner, this silver is the Marchioness's blood and sweat, now invested in our enterprise." The corner of my lips curved upward in a smile tinged with mockery. "The Marquis household has taken me in. As their legitimate daughter, of course I must know how to use their money as working capital. Take these 500 taels. At dawn tomorrow, go to the southern workshops and purchase every bit of the finest rose petals and the newly arrived South Sea pearl powder." I drew a stack of yellowed papers from my sash. They were covered in tiny characters written in vermilion ink. "These are the cosmetic formulas my adoptive mother devoted her life to developing. She kept them safe." I spread the designs across the table. "From today onward, Ruyan Pavilion will no longer sell cheap cosmetics to commoners. I want you to put all of our capital into making only 2 products. Bingshan Dew, distilled from morning dew and roses to nourish the complexion, and Danmu Red, a deep crimson, smudge-proof lip color made from cordyline sap." Uncle Shen took the formulas and ran his fingers over every line of handwriting. His tone was filled with admiration. The owner intends to target the titled ladies and noblewomen of the capital. But our shop is known to be closed. How will we attract customers? Things become valuable because they are scarce. The harder something is to obtain, the more people crave it. I tapped one finger rhythmically against the design for the containers. Have the woodworkers make custom rosewood boxes inlaid with mother-of-pearl orchids. Ruyan Pavilion will release exactly 30 boxes each month. In the first month after we reopen, we will not sell them to the public. Send people to deliver invitations and gift boxes to the 10 most influential titled ladies in secret. Once noblewomen find the cosmetics good, their rivalry will naturally be stirred, and they will race to our door to spend money. A bright light flashed in Uncle Shen's eyes. He immediately clasped his hands and bowed deeply. I understand, owner. You are most wise. This move will surely shake the capital's circle of noblewomen. By March, peach blossoms were blooming brilliantly in Moonwatch Pavilion at the Marquis of Zhengguo's estate. Petals scattered across the surface of Jade Lake. That day, Song Jiwei personally sent invitations for a tea gathering of young noblewomen from prominent families. The stated purpose was to admire flowers and drink tea. In truth, it was a stage for her to display the status of the second miss of a marquis household, and to use the hands of her refined sisters to trample what little dignity remained to the bankrupt merchant's daughter, who had recently returned as the first miss. The marble table was piled with exquisite pastries. Longjing tea brewed with morning dew steamed in the cups. I wore a plain moon-white silk dress without a single embroidered flower on the hem. I wore only a simple carved silver hairpin in my hair. Amid the jade pins, golden hair ornaments, brocade and silk of the young noblewomen, I looked like a dull gray sparrow that had wandered into a cage of peacocks. The moment I sat down, Miss Li, the daughter of the Vice Minister of Personnel, let her gaze sweep over me with open scrutiny. She covered her mouth and laughed softly. Then she extended her sleeve to reveal a delicate little rosewood box inlaid with mother-of-pearl, which she set on the table. The weather is dry today, so I deliberately brought a box of Ruyan Pavilion's Bingshan Dew for all my sisters to admire. It feels as cool as plum blossom frost on the skin and carries a faint magnolia scent. It is truly the finest thing in the world. Miss Zhao, the daughter of the Minister of War, sat beside her. Her eyes immediately lit up. Little sister Li is truly capable. I heard Ruyan Pavilion sells only 30 boxes a month. Even money cannot guarantee a place in line. Last month I had my servants wait there for 3 days and 3 nights before they brought back a box of Danmu Red. It made my lips soft and kept its color throughout the entire banquet. The young ladies instantly crowded together, chattering about the cosmetics brand that had taken the capital by storm. Their eyes shone with envy and pride as they spoke. Song Jiwei took a sip of tea, a smug smile lifting her lips. She turned toward me, sitting quietly at the corner of the table. Her tone was sweet, but every word was soaked in venom. Elder sister has probably never heard of Ruyan Pavilion, has she? Well, that makes sense. Elder sister wandered outside for 15 years, was raised by merchants, and then suffered bankruptcy. When you can barely afford food and clothing, how could you know about such luxurious cosmetics? Fine fragrances are very expensive. It is best that elder sister maintain a frugal way of life, lest trying to imitate others give you new worries. A few muffled laughs arose. Following Song Jiwei's gaze, the young noblewomen threw looks of sympathy wrapped in contempt at me. They relished the sense of superiority that came from trampling someone they believed to be poor. I remained seated upright, my expression calm as an autumn lake. I held a celadon teacup in both hands and gently blew at the thin steam. The lids of the cosmetic boxes before me bore recessed patterns I had personally designed. I knew every ingredient and every ratio, from their fragrance to their texture. These noble daughters were proudly displaying my possessions in order to humiliate me. I lightly set my teacup down. My delicate brows drew together, and I let out a long, weary sigh. Younger sister is right, I was born poor. How could I dare covet the precious things sold by Ruyan Pavilion? I looked at the rosewood box on the table, my tone full of timid concern. It is only that 2 days ago, I disguised myself in rough clothing to buy some embroidery thread to patch my clothes. By chance, I passed the rear courtyard of Ruyan Pavilion and overheard several shop stewards whispering inside. After hearing them, I truly began to worry for all of you noble ladies. Miss Li frowned. The smile on her lips stiffened. What did you hear? I hesitated and looked around the group, pretending to be frightened by a shocking secret I had overheard. I heard that Ruyan Pavilion's owner is extremely sinister. He deliberately produces only a small quantity as bait, then allows the daughters of influential officials to buy on credit and take the goods home while their purchases are recorded in ledgers. Over the past few months, the unpaid debts have piled up like mountains. That day, I saw the head shopkeeper scolding the servants as he worked his abacus. He said that the deadline was the end of this month. If those young ladies did not bring money to settle their accounts in full. I swallowed and deliberately lowered my voice to a grim whisper. He would stamp every debt book with red seals, hire dozens of beggars carrying gongs and drums, and have them beat loudly in front of the gates of every residence to demand payment. He also threatened to submit the list of noble young ladies who dressed luxuriously but refused to pay for cosmetics to the magistrate's office. The moment I finished speaking, the atmosphere in Moonwatch Pavilion froze. The wind swept several peach petals onto the table, but no one had the heart to admire them. Miss Li's face turned pale as paper. The hand holding the lid of the Bingshin Do box so badly that she dropped it with a sharp clack against the stone tabletop. She swallowed hard, her eyes darting about in panic. Miss Zhao was no better. The silk handkerchief in her hand had been crushed into wrinkled folds. The color drained from her face, leaving it ashen, and beads of sweat began to form on her forehead. I placed one hand lightly over my chest and continued playing the innocent country girl who worried too much about other people's affairs. Oh heavens! At the time, I vaguely heard the head shopkeeper murmuring the names written in the debt ledger. The eldest daughter of the Vice Minister of Personnel owed 800 taels, the second daughter of the Minister of War owed 500 taels, and there were debts from several other residences as well. They are truly bold beyond measure, plotting to disgrace the reputations of the officials at court. Great households value their honor most. If this matter becomes known, and the officials learn that the daughters in their homes have spent so extravagantly that they owe money in street shops, being beaten until their legs are broken, and sent to the ancestral hall would be the least of it. More importantly, if their future husbands' families find out, the betrothal gifts may not even be delivered before they hurry to demand a broken engagement. Every word I spoke was light as a feather. Yet when it reached the ears of those noble young women, it weighed as heavily as 1,000 hammers. The households of high officials kept a very tight hold on their daughters' allowances. The young women wanted luxury goods to display their status at tea gatherings, but ordinary monthly allowances could never be enough. Secretly buying on credit at a cosmetics shop was their deepest secret. They had assumed Ruian Pavilion would not dare make a fuss because it feared the power of officials. They never imagined that the anonymous owner would be such a ruthless madman, bold enough to threaten to beat gongs and drums in front of the estate gates to collect debts. For a sheltered young lady, reputation was life itself. If it became known that she had bought cosmetics on credit and refused to pay, her entire future would be ruined. Miss Li suddenly stood up. In her fluster, she struck the edge of the table and spilled tea across it. She hurriedly grabbed the Bingshin Do box and stuffed it into her sleeve, forcing a crooked smile. Little sister Jue, I suddenly remembered that mother told me to go home at noon and try on new clothes. I am also feeling a little chilled. Please forgive my discourtesy, but I must take my leave first. Miss Zhao rose in panic as well, nearly stumbling. Yes, I have urgent matters to handle at home too. The tea today was excellent. Thank you, little sister, for your hospitality. I will leave first. Like bees from a broken hive, the young noblewomen competed to invent awkward excuses. One claimed a stomachache, another claimed a headache. A third remembered that she had to copy Buddhist scriptures. They hurriedly lifted their skirts, gathered their maidservants, and fled Moonwatch Pavilion as if their lives depended on it. Their panicked figures looked as though ghosts demanding their lives were chasing them from behind. They needed to rush home at once, gather up their jewelry, sell off gold bracelets, and bring cash to Ruian Pavilion to cover those crushing debts before the head shopkeeper truly began beating gongs and drums. In the blink of an eye, the tea table that had been lively with flattering laughter held only cold porcelain cups and a few messy plates of sweets. Song Jiwei stood frozen like a wooden statue, her eyes wide as she watched the backs of her dear friends, who had scattered in all directions. She did not understand what had happened at all. The tea gathering she had painstakingly prepared for days, meant to exploit the moment and humiliate me, had collapsed completely after a few casual words from a bankrupt country girl. I slowly lifted my cup of tea, blew away the peach petal that had fallen onto its surface, and took a sip of its rich fragrance. The sweet aftertaste slid down my throat, carrying an immense sense of refreshment. My money was not something people could so easily hold in their hands and use to sneer at others. Debts had to be paid. If they wanted to use luxury goods to appear more refined, they should bring silver to my door. I set down my teacup, dusted the hem of my dress, and rose with a kindly smile for Song Zhiwei, whose chest heaved with anger. The tea was excellent today. Thank you, younger sister, for your hospitality. You may enjoy these peach blossoms yourself. Your elder sister's body is weak, so I will return to my room and finish sewing my clothes. I left Song Zhiwei standing in the empty pavilion, clenching her teeth in fury. I strolled back along the corridor to Cold Bamboo Courtyard, a satisfied smile rising faintly at the corner of my lips. After that tea gathering, Ruyan Pavilion's ledgers recorded a huge influx of cash in rapid succession. Terrified by the prospect of having gongs and drums beaten outside their estate gates to demand payment, the noble young ladies secretly brought gold, silver, and jewelry to settle their debts in full. With such ample capital, Uncle Shen had more than enough to expand the workshops and release new designs. Money poured continuously into my pockets, while I remained in Cold Bamboo Courtyard each day, holding a bowl of coarse millet mixed rice and playing the role of a poor, resigned eldest daughter. Time flew. In the blink of an eye, early winter arrived. The north wind began to roar through the layers of roof tiles at the Marquise of Zhengguo's estate. Along with the bone-piercing cold, the household's poverty reached its peak. Song Zhiwei had become engaged to the Grand Tutor's concubine-born son, and the marriage was set for early spring of the following year. The Grand Tutor's family was among the most distinguished scholarly lineages in the realm, and the betrothal gifts they had sent were especially grand. To return the courtesy and preserve the face of a noble household, the Marchioness had to prepare a dowry worthy of Song Zhiwei at the very least, a 10-mile bridal trousseau, with chest after chest laden with dowry. Unfortunately, the Marquis household's treasury had long been empty. The Marquis's meager official stipend could not begin to cover the extravagant spending of the bloated household. Old Madame ate rare delicacies every day. The Marchioness wore the finest brocades. Song Zhiwei spent money like water. They hollowed out the household to maintain a glittering outer shell. Now that an enormous dowry was needed, the Marchioness was completely trapped. Desperation makes people reckless. Through the internal merchant network of Ruyan Pavilion, I learned early that the Marchioness had recently been meeting in secret with a trader who called himself Master Wan and claimed to come from the borderlands. He offered her an extremely tempting opportunity: invest in a cargo ship filled with 1,000-year ginseng and snowfox pelts from the north, bound for the capital. He promised profits 10 times the investment after only 1 month. Desperate for money and eager to save face, the Marchioness was dazzled by the unimaginable profits. She concealed everything from the Marquis. Secretly, she mortgaged all the deeds to the Marquis household's most fertile suburban estates. She even gritted her teeth and pawned several storefront shops to underground lenders in exchange for usurious loans. She poured every tale of that high-interest borrowed money into Master Wan's hands, dreaming that she would recover 10,000 taels of gold in a month and marry off her daughter in splendor. That night, the first snow began to drift down. In the secret study behind Ruyan Pavilion, fine charcoal crackled in the brazier, giving off warmth that drove away the cold. I reclined in a brocade-upholstered armchair. In my hand was a small pair of silver scissors, and I leisurely trimmed the yellowed leaves from a pot of white plum brought up from the south. Uncle Shen stood with folded arms beside me, his expression deeply thoughtful. In a low voice, he reported everything. "Owner, matters have gone exactly as expected. The land deeds of the Marquis household are already in the hands of the underground usurers. I have also sent people to investigate Master Wan's background in secret. He is a notorious swindler from the Liangguang region, specializing in false shipping ventures to deceive declining, profit-hungry families. His ship, in truth, had already raised anchor and fled south, carrying away all the Marchioness's hard-earned money." Uncle Shen glanced at me and continued with hesitation. "The usurious debt will breed interest upon interest. In only half a month it will grow so large that even selling the entire Marquis estate will not repay it. The hired debt collectors from the underworld are ruthless and will not respect the dignity of officials. Should we intervene to stop Master Wan, or send word to the Marquis beforehand so that he can salvage some of the property?" Snip! The silver blade snapped shut with a dry click. I decisively cut off a plum branch that had grown in the wrong direction and let it fall onto the velvet carpet on the floor. I gently brushed away the powdery dust still clinging to the leaves. Then I smiled, lifted my hot tea, and took a sip. My eyes were calm, without the slightest ripple. "Uncle Shen, you followed my parents in business for so many years. Have you forgotten the rules of the marketplace? Their affairs are theirs, mine are mine. They chose to carry the torch and set the fire themselves. Why should I pour water to save them? I stretched my hands toward the glowing brazier and felt the heat against my skin. The Marquis of Zhengguo's household has always been arrogant. One moment they despise merchants, the next they mock the poor. They are convinced that noble blood alone makes their intelligence superior to everyone else's. The Marchioness was blinded by appearances. She wanted to use money to build a glorious life for her false daughter, and she stepped into the pit of greed of her own accord. Justice may be slow, but it misses no one. I do not need to lift a finger. Let their greed and arrogance destroy them. I tossed the withered plum branch into the charcoal brazier. The flame caught the dry wood, flared a brilliant red, and quickly turned it to ash. Pass down my order. Ruyan Pavilion will stay out of it. Open the doors, do business, and collect money in peace. Anyone in the shop who dares involve themselves in the Marquis household's affairs, or let slip a single word about them, will have their legs broken and be thrown out. For this second act, we need only sit in the best seats, nibble melon seeds and enjoy the show. Uncle Shen Zhi bowed respectfully. As you command, owner. You have remarkable foresight. This time the Marquis household truly cannot be saved. Sure enough, retribution came even faster than expected. Exactly 1 month later, the Marchioness sat restlessly in her courtyard, dressing Song Jiwei day after day as they waited for the ship carrying thousand-year ginseng to arrive. Then disastrous news crashed down upon them. Master Wan had vanished without a trace. In the northern docks, there was not a single merchant ship flying his flag. Rumors began to spread through every street and alley. The Marchioness of the Marquis of Zhengguo's household had been swindled out of tens of thousands of taels of silver. That was not all. The deadline for the usurious loans arrived. Hired debt collectors from underground gambling gangs began to act. They brought loan contracts bearing the Marchioness's clear thumbprint and charged straight through the gates of the Marquis estate. Gongs thundered. The vulgar curses of the ruffians echoed through the entire long street, drawing hundreds of curious commoners who gathered to point and whisper. The men held the contracts high and loudly declared that the Marquis household was drowning in debt. They demanded the seizure of every estate and storefront to pay it. The Marquis returned from court. The moment he stepped down from his carriage and approached the gate, he saw the humiliating spectacle. Once he heard the full story and saw his wife's signature and personal seal on the high-interest loan papers with his own eyes, his eyes rolled back in fury. He spat out a mouthful of blood and collapsed unconscious onto the stone steps. Inside the estate, old Madame suffered a heart attack and fainted when she heard the news. The cries and sobs of the maidservants and household servants rang mournfully through the estate, like the wailing of ghosts and spirits. Song Jiwei, who had been dreaming of a magnificent 10-mile bridal trousseau, now faced the reality of her family's bankruptcy. She was so frightened that she covered her face, crouched in a corner, and trembled violently. The Marchioness, her hair in disarray, collapsed in the courtyard. Her vacant eyes watched the debt collectors carry out furnishings, antiques, paintings, and calligraphic scrolls from the main hall to offset the crushing interest. The 100-year foundation of the Marquis of Zhengguo's household, the glamorous false shell they had struggled to maintain for so many years, officially shattered into countless fragments under the weight of bottomless greed. Through the crack in the window of cold bamboo courtyard, I silently watched the chaos unfold outside. A faint smile touched my lips. Accounts were settled fairly. I felt neither resentment nor hatred. I simply let that rotten family place its own neck into the noose and drown in its own filth. The game was over. It was time to pack my things and leave this cramped birdcage. The Marchioness's usurious borrowing and her role in enabling swindlers to manipulate the family's assets could not be hidden forever. A needle cannot stay hidden in a sack. The censorate caught the scent of corruption and immediately submitted a memorial to the throne, exposing the Song family's ruined household morals and its usurious dealings that exploited the people. The emperor flew into a rage. The imperial decree fell like thunder from a clear sky. The Marquis of Zhengguo was stripped of all titles and dismissed from office. His property was confiscated for the state and sealed to repay the debts. The plaque that had hung above the Great Gate for hundreds of years was torn down by imperial guards and smashed on the stone steps. That same day, the Grand Tutor's household immediately sent its steward with a letter breaking off the engagement and the returned birth cards. He threw them straight into Song Jiwei's face. A lofty scholarly family would never accept a daughter-in-law from a disgraced, debt-ridden household tainted by criminal conviction. The second Mrs. dream of a 10-mile bridal trousseau and of becoming mother of the nation burst like a bubble. In the bitter cold of the 12th lunar month, the north wind howled like blades cutting into skin. The Song family was driven from the estate by the guards. They wore only thin, rough clothes meant for servants. Old Madame sat in a creaking wooden cart that the Marquis himself pulled forward with difficulty. She coughed violently, one fit after another. The Marchioness's hair was disheveled, her eye sockets sunken. She clutched the hand of the tearful Song Zhi, and the two of them dragged their heavy feet across the freezing snow. They had lost all their glory. Gritting their teeth, they could only search for a ruined roof in the slums of the western city where they might temporarily shelter. At that moment, the flow of people swept them toward the most prosperous street in the capital. Before Ruyan Pavilion, the silk-canopied carriages of titled ladies lined up one after another. The fragrance of hot tea drifted from inside the shop, forming a complete contrast to the poverty and hunger of the Song family shivering by the roadside. The Marchioness swallowed and raised her eyes toward the exquisite boxes of pastries displayed on the counter. Her cracked hand trembled as she reached forward, about to ask for a cup of hot water to warm herself. At that moment, an exceptionally magnificent rosewood carriage inlaid with mother-of-pearl, pulled by two gleaming black horses, slowly stopped before the main entrance of Ruyan Pavilion. The crowd immediately parted to form a passage. 2 rows of guards in neat black martial clothing stepped forward respectfully and spread a red velvet carpet from the carriage step all the way to the shop entrance. Uncle Shen, dressed in the imposing robes of the head shopkeeper, personally lifted the pearl-beaded silk curtain of the carriage. A slender hand wearing a jade bracelet extended from within. The woman who stepped down caused the entire corner of the street to erupt in excitement. She wore a flawless white fox fur cloak. Beneath it was a floating cloud-patterned silk gown embroidered with shimmering gold thread. Her black hair was adorned with a phoenix hairpin holding a pearl. Every step she took radiated lofty, noble grace. The Marchioness froze, her eyes widening as her pupils shrank. Song Zhi, standing beside her, opened her mouth in shock and dropped the ragged cloth bundle in her hand onto the snow. The woman walking brilliantly through the crowd, surrounded by the fawning attention of the titled ladies, was none other than Song Jinju, the biological daughter they had spent months calling a filthy, destitute wretch. Jinju, the Marchioness murmured, her voice fractured like that of a sleepwalker. As her sluggish mind finally connected all the clues, realization exploded in her head. The mysterious, immensely wealthy owner of Ruyan Pavilion, the daughter said to be bankrupt and drowning in debt, the 500-tael advance. It had all been a perfect performance to deceive the world. Desperation and the instinct to survive overwhelmed the last remnants of the Marchioness's pride. As though she had found a lifeline, she lunged forward desperately, shoving several servants aside. Jinju, my daughter, my good daughter. She stretched out her filthy hands, trying to seize the hem of my cloak, tears pouring down her face. Save your mother, the family is in trouble. Your father and grandmother are about to starve to death in the street. You are the owner of Ruyan Pavilion. You have money. Quickly take us into your courtyard. Song Zhi rushed forward too, crying miserably. Elder sister, I know I was wrong. For the sake of our blood ties, please save me. I have never harmed you these past few months. Before either of them could touch my skirt, 4 powerful guards drew their blades. With a cold sweep of their powerful arms, they shoved both women away. The two fell headlong into the dirty snow along the roadside. I stopped at the highest stone step and slowly turned around. My calm eyes, like an ancient well, swept over the miserable Song family huddled on the ground. Move aside. I lifted my hand to signal the guards to stand back. My indifferent voice sounded through the freezing air. Passersby who do not know the situation may think Ruyan Pavilion is bullying destitute commoners. The Marchioness struggled back to her feet. Ignoring the pain, she continued her tearful moral appeals. Jinju, Song blood runs through you. I carried you and suffered to give birth to you. Now that you are rich and noble, can you truly bear to stand by and watch your own parents freeze to death in the street? Where has your filial duty gone? I smiled, but the smile did not reach my eyes. Madam seems to have forgotten what she said. My voice was clear, every word like a nail hammered directly into their ears. Half a year ago, on the very first day I entered the Marquis estate, Madam publicly declared that I was tainted by association with vulgar merchants, bringing misfortune and poverty, and forbade me even to call you mother. Even the small monthly allowance owed to Madam's own flesh and blood made her hesitate, as though you were cutting off pieces of your own flesh before you squeezed out 500 measly taels. My gaze slid towards Song Zhi, who was trembling uncontrollably. And as for this second miss, you held poetry readings and tea gatherings again and again. Every time you opened your mouth, you despised the stench of copper and praised the lofty refinement of a well-bred noblewoman. Why are you now crying and kneeling for a few dirty coins earned by merchants, throwing away every trace of your noble bearing? Song Jiwei bit her lip until it bled. She lowered her face to her knees, too humiliated to lift her head and meet anyone's eyes. "You are cruel and heartless," the Marchioness said, pointing at me with a shaking finger. Her eyes were filled with resentment. "You knew about that usury trap from the beginning. You deliberately stood aside and watched the Marquis household collapse, didn't you?" The smile vanished from my face. My cold, sharp gaze pierced through her. Madame planted her own greed. Madame signed the contracts herself. I run an honest business and pay my taxes in full. I have never used the name of the Marquis household to profit from even one coin. Their affairs are theirs, mine are mine. Your family's destruction was brought about by your own foolishness and hollow vanity. Now that your household has fallen, you want to bind me with a few moral phrases and make me clean up the pile of rubbish you created. In business, that is called a losing transaction. I will never make it. When I finished speaking, I removed the small brocade purse at my waist and flicked my wrist. Several dull copper coins rolled out of the bag and dropped onto the white snow, landing right beside the torn shoes of the Marchioness. "Today is the first day of the month. Ruyan Pavilion is giving alms to the poor. Take these few coins as the last charity I will offer for the sake of blood ties. From this day forward, Song Jinju and your Marquis household are strangers. Every favor and every obligation between us is ended. There is no longer any bond at all." Without waiting for the Marchioness to react, I turned decisively and crossed the threshold of Ruyan Pavilion. The wind chimes beneath the eaves rang brightly. The guards immediately formed a line and slammed the two finely carved wooden doors shut, completely separating the cold and despair of the Song family outside from the warmth within. Inside the hall, the heat from the charcoal brazier spread pleasantly through the air. The rich fragrance of cosmetics blended with the bustle of customers. Uncle Shen carried over a thick book of accounts, opened it respectfully and placed it on the marble table. I sat down in an armchair, dipped my brush deeply in vermilion ink, and began carefully checking every line of silver that had come in. The East City shop would have to consider buying additional space that day to expand the workshop again.